once the closest thing to a town in the lands beyond the wall, something terrible and mysterious befell Hardhome about 600 years ago. It has since become an overgrown ruin, shunned, and considered accursed. Yet despite that, it is suddenly important again in A Song of Ice and Fire, as hordes of refugees flee there following the dreams of a woods witch. As reports reach John of wights in the woods and waters, dreams reach Melisandre of an impossibly cold mist turning the free folk into skulls. What the heck happened all those years ago? And what the heck is happening there now? Could this be how the others get, or at least dramatically increase, the size of their army? I would argue that there is so much happening at Castle Black alone, never mind the rest of the wall and beyond, especially at the end of A Dance with Dragons, that Hardhome tends to get lost in the shuffle a bit, especially for book readers, but even for those of us who are most obsessed. Of course, because it was a little more prominent on the TV show is why I phrase it that way. But Hardhome, however, heavily hews to those happenings, meaning it is tied inextricably to a lot of different plot lines. John decides to go to Hardhome, then changes his mind to march south, then gets stabbed. So you can see why it's rather chaotic and caught up amongst other plot lines. So it's connected to a lot of things, and it's very important by itself. It's a place destroyed by fire, now overwhelmed by ice. It is indeed cursed, if you look at it that way, with both natural and supernatural explanations behind all that. And we've got that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast.
Do we have any more alliteration? That was nice.
I always try to squeeze in alliteration when I can. But I can't always, because I just can't always come up with it, you know? It's a treat for those occasional times. That's right. Hello and welcome, everybody. It's another episode of History of Westeros podcast. We're so happy to be here with you. It's another Sunday. It is approximately 3 o'clock, which is when we get started if you're in Eastern time on most Sundays. Keep in mind that our time frames will be switching whenever there's a TV show on, which will be happening in June of 2024 is the next time that's coming. Every video on YouTube, every episode is up on Spotify in both video and audio form. In fact, you can find our podcast anywhere you find your regular podcasts. We should be available on any platform. But if you sign up on Patreon, you get our show ad-free.
You know, we might switch the schedule around a little bit whenever there's a new TV show out. We might also switch the schedule around a little bit whenever a new book comes out.
We might keep that on Sundays, but it'll certainly be a big change to our world, even if it doesn't specifically change the date of our regular live streaming. But that's a good point. Yeah, things that happen sometimes change our schedule. Yeah, how's it going, Sean? What you got on your shirt there?
That's
that requires some explanation.
An image from The Last Airbender, Aang the Last Airbender,
Okay.
who was frozen in ice. I've been a little inspired from the idea of what might be frozen up in the north.
Right on. And I have the Night's Watch Brothers shirt, the Blues Brothers. Instead of the Blues Brothers, you know, it's the it's the Black Brothers, even though it says
Sam
Night's
and
Watch
John.
Brothers.
Yes.
They're on a mission from God, the old gods.
I have a Pickle Jar Hero shirt. Any fans of Curb Your Enthusiasm will know the reference to the Pickle Jar Gambit, one of my most oft-referenced Curb bits, and I'm quite excited for the episode tonight.
Everybody wants to be a Pickle Jar Hero.
I always want to be a Pickle Jar Hero. I mean, it applies to everything.
It really does.
Not just pickle
Let me
jars.
do it. I'll
Let
get it.
me do
I'll get it.
Surely I will get it. I'm different. No, you always want to try. Even if I don't think I'm going to get it, I have to try.
It is a strange little quirk of human nature that, yes, we all individually want to be the one to open the pickle jar or whatever, open the strange packaging, whatever the difficult package is, among other things. Yeah. So hello everybody. I want to also give a shout out to our good friend Nina. You can check her out at goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. That's 1 L in alley and 1 L in Tumblr. I don't suppose you thought there'd be 2 in there, but just in case, Tumblr is TUMBLR.
No, it's Slumbler, and the first L is silent.
Slumbler. Tumblr.
Slumbler.
Tumblr. The latest blog post over on goodqueenalley.tumblr.com is a question about wards and the age limit, and how does that work when, like, Theon was 19, for example? When would that have expired at some point? Like, how does that work? When could he have just still been there when he was 30 if nothing had changed? Like, how does that actually work?
For a moment, I thought you said warts.
Warts, yes.
Wards.
How do warts work in Westeros? Because they don't have.
Whenever he grows up, whenever Theon grows up, that's when
yeah. So it just never, yeah.
Maybe never, yeah.
But not only does Nina have some good takes on this, she has some direct quotes from George on the matter. So it's worth reading for multiple reasons. So check that out. Once again, that is goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. You can send us questions at westeroshistory@gmail.com, or you can post them here in the live chat, and we might answer them live and shout your name out. We'll also mention some episodes at the end of this one that relate to the topic at hand, in case you want to stay immersed. And I will also answer this trivia question for you all, unless you already know the answer. Then you don't need me to tell you the answer, but it will come at the end, one way or the other. The question being, what is the name of Cotter Pike's ship? The name will be read during this episode, so pay attention if you don't recall. Also, congrats to Ashton, aka Fox and Brambles, for winning both of the trivia games that we held on our monthly Discord hangout for patrons.
Yeah.
That was a dominating performance.
Yeah, she did very well. There were a lot of sigil questions, and she does a lot of sigil art, so she had a leg up. But no, she did very well.
Yeah.
Just props to her.
Good job. Good job. Good jorb. Good jorb.
That's the designer of our logo, if y'all didn't know, too.
That's right. That's right. In the first half of this episode, we will deal with the history of Hardhome, the mysteries of its destruction, and that's going to include some real-life volcano lore. Second half of the episode, we'll discuss what's actually happening there now. So a good old past and present look. As we'll explain in this episode as well, Hardhome, from a meta perspective, was conceived by George at least a decade prior to A Dance with Dragons, so maybe after A Storm of Swords, but definitely before A Feast for Crows. And that's when we first hear of it. A Dance with Dragons is when it's first mentioned, and as we so often do, we'll start with that first mention. It's the very first chapter of A Dance with Dragons. In fact, it is the Varamir's prologue, so right off the bat. Now, it's not strange that Hardhome hadn't been mentioned prior to A Dance with Dragons, because it was abandoned. No one lived there. There wasn't much reason to go there. Even the free folk hadn't really lived there for centuries until recently. So recent events caused it to become important again, which is why it pops up in the narrative after having not been mentioned before.
It's not like people think about it every day like Rome.
Yeah, exactly. We do hear that ships from Eastwatch by the Sea occasionally pass by the area because it's part of ranging. Like, rangers go over land to check things out, but they also do like sea ranging, and by going up the coasts there. And Hardhome is on the coast, so it's not that they're specifically checking out Hardhome, it's they're checking out the coast, and Hardhome is there. But here's why that has changed. Here's why Hardhome is becoming important again after so long. A leader has emerged, apparently on the strength of some dreams she's had. Her name is Mother Mole, and here is a quote about her.
Supposedly, she made her home in a burrow beneath a hollow tree. Whatever the truth of that, she had a vision of a fleet of ships arriving to carry the free folk to safety across the narrow sea. Thousands of those who fled the battle were desperate enough to believe her. Mother Mole has led them all to Hardhome, there to pray and await salvation from across the sea.
Arthur Yorwick scowled. I'm no ranger, but Hardhome is an unholy place, it is said. Cursed. Even your uncle used to say as much, Lord Snow. Why would they go there?
Could you do me a favor, Sean? I'm going to edit it
Yes.
in. Will you just say Othel Yarwick scowled?
Othel Yarwick.
Thank you.
We don't know much about this Mother Mole person at all. We haven't seen her on screen. She's just been mentioned by several people, both by Varamir, by Jon Snow, and maybe a few others. If she's inventing her dream, there's a certain cleverness to the choice of Hardhome, which is that it is the best place for ships to arrive. However, there's no reason to think that ships would arrive because it's been gone for so long. So I don't think this is some plot by Mother Mole just leading the people there on a whim. I think she really did have this dream. I think she's sincere. In other words, it might be just a crazy random dream. However, it really does happen. Ships actually do show up there. So we have a lot of reason to believe that this was a legitimate prophetic dream. Both ships from the Night's Watch and some random slave ships from Lys are blown off course there. So Mother Mole quotes it as salvation where they once found damnation. And that's sort of true.
You know what this makes me think of?
What's that?
Is Druselka, the Roynish priestess.
Oh, yeah.
That was part of the Roynish migration. She also sort of led her people to, their demise.
That's
right?
a good point. Yes, that's a very good point. Before Nymeria led them away.
Yeah, well, she led them away, and some Roynish went back to.
Oh,
the
it was Druselka. That's okay. I was thinking somebody else.
Yeah, no,
gotcha.
Druselka led her, brought a bunch of people from. They were in the Summer Isles.
That's right. After their wanderings went bad, some people went back. And
they went back, and they just got hunted down and enslaved.
Which is what happened here. You're right. So the dream. This is one of the most tragic examples of how dream interpretation can go so wrong. Technically, the dream was salvation where they once found damnation. Well, that is true for some of them, as we'll see, but only a very small percentage of them escaped to some warmer pastures. A lot of others were captured by slavers. Technically, they went somewhere warmer, but in slavery, in chains, it's not a better life. And that's what befell most of the people who got away from Hardhome to this point.
That might be a debatable point. It might be a better life because the alternative might be starve and freeze to death, or
risen again,
be
as
killed by
undead.
zombies.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
It's hard to say.
Rock and a hard place type situation, which is really what a lot of this episode is going to contain. Like, well, this is awful. Well, the alternative is worse, and that's sort of how I phrased it to begin the episode. We have a place that was destroyed by fire, and now is being overwhelmed by ice. So it's truly, it itself is caught between the two major elemental forces that this story highlights.
I don't remember if it's in the document, but I remember there was a quote, "Bad, worse, and worst, the beggar's choice."
Yes. Yeah, and that's often what this is. Yeah, I mean, the people aren't going to Hardhome because they think great things are going to happen. It is desperation. They're already starving and cold, and a lot of them are sick and hounded by the others and by the undead. So, and by Night's Watch, and for a while Stannis' men were hunting them too, because this is all fallout from the battle beneath the wall. So we don't have any real... So I rose the idea of Mother Mole inventing this dream just to dismiss it. I want to be thorough. I don't actually think that's very likely, but, we're trying to cover all the bases here. So I think she had the dream, and they've all followed this dream, and, well, this is where it's taking us. So, go ahead.
I want to point another thing out here is that this Mother Mole character... I wonder if she might become significant. Like, it's hard to predict where this is going, because I can imagine we never even go to Hardhome. Like, there's no follow through with this,
Yeah.
But whether we do or not, I still think it's interesting. This Mother Mole character convinced thousands of people to follow this dream, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a dream, and maybe the people close to you, or maybe even your whole village, but she got thousands of people to go. So her or someone close to her must have some significant influence, whether it's a leadership role or maybe her dreams have been correct in the past. I wonder how many other prophecies she has thrown out there that came to fruition. And people are like, well, I guess we better do what she's saying.
She might be charismatic. It might just be... You're right. I like the idea that she's had prophetic dreams come true before. And since this one did, in a manner of speaking, certainly ships did arrive there. That's not debatable. So, yeah, and if we're going back to Varamir's chapter, it is indeed a scene of great desperation. He thinks on how there's literally, like you said, Sean, thousands of them, quote, struggling through the forest, hungry, frightened, fleeing the carnage that had descended on them at the wall. It's a series of such conditions for the free folk. Yeah, a bunch of, like you said, bad, worse, worst, or damned if you do, damned if you don't choices. Name your cliche. There's a lot of them that fit here. Now, also at Hardhome, this is what we also have sort of in the mix that we'll discuss more later in the second half, but this is what's attached to this, is the Night's Watch fleet, which is 11 ships. Some of them are commandeered from Tycho Nestoris. Some of them are commandeered from Lyseni, and one's a Pentashi trader, one's an Ibonese whale. It's a ragtag group. And then there were other Lyseni ships that came before the Night's Watch fleet that were the Goodheart and the Elephant. And those are the ones that took slaves and tried to get away. One of which ended up at Braavos because it was taking on water, and Arya finds out about it. And so we have a connection with this plotline to Arya, and as we've discussed in the past, and we'll raise again later in the episode, it's also a potential connection to Daenerys because the other ship was making its way through the Stepstones, and perhaps Daenerys or somebody else will pass through there, and the news of what's going on in the north will trickle to Daenerys, and that will be perhaps the thing that gets her to go north.
And I gotta say, a connection like this in the first book, maybe you write off as something that George planted but didn't harvest.
Yeah.
Right? But at this point, these connections, I feel like they've got to be meaningful. I don't think he's doing this randomly now,
Yeah, you're right. It's the product of more recent planning and plotting out for the plots. Yeah, exactly. So if you think about it that way, that's why you could argue that the prophecy somewhat came true for some of these people, because the one ship, the Goodheart, there's the Goodheart and the Elephant. These are the two slave ships that took a bunch of free folk slaves from Hardhome and slipped away before the Night's Watch even showed up. One of the ships, like I said, is making its way through the Stepstones and might be picked up by Orain Waters or any number of people, Salador Sans people, who knows. But the other one ended up in Braavos, like we said. They will probably have a good fate. This might be the one example, the potential possible exception to people getting taken off into slavery or starving or whatever, because Braavos is aggressively anti-slavery, so they're relatively safe. They might not have a good life there, but they won't be enslaved. They might be poor, and they might be in poverty. In fact, it's pretty likely for a lot of them, but some of them will find jobs, employment, what have you, and they're living in a warmer place than they were. They're not going to be killed by the others. They're not going to be eaten by giants. So it's definitely a massive improvement on their fortunes, and especially when you compare it to the rest of them who are either still there or did get carried off into slavery. But a lot of that is what we will hone in more in on the second half of the episode. Let's cast our gaze back in time to discuss both the history of the place and just its geography, its layout, the place, what it means, why it was selected for a habitable location in the first place. And let's get on it with a quote.
Hardhome sits on a sheltered bay and has a natural harbor deep enough for the biggest ships afloat. Wood and stone are plentiful near there. The waters teem with fish, and there are colonies of seals and sea cows close at hand.
Now, sea cows, I think that means walrus, but it might mean I think it has to be walrus, because I know sometimes sea cows are manatees, but manatees wouldn't live in that climate. So that can't be it. I think that's walrus. And walruses there's blubber, there's meat, there's tusks. It's very useful. It sits on... Go ahead.
This is George's fantasy world. They might just be sea cows.
Yeah, sea cows. Yeah, they're just little bovine, undersea bovine swimming around. Yeah. So we should have a map shot here. It sits on the east coast of Storald's Point, which is a nice little outcrop of land there on the east coast of the lands beyond the wall. I don't know who Storald is, but he has a point. And there it is. It sits near vast forests, as it says there. There's mountains nearby. We know that given the mention of caves and cliffs, the screaming caves that we'll talk about. Not to mention the likely volcanic activity, which has probably made it more fertile, too. That's one thing we've learned about volcanoes over our studies and talking about volcanoes in a variety of scenarios like Dragonstone and Valyria that might be plantable. Not that the free folk do much of that, but were it to have developed to that point, it might have been a place where agriculture, or at least grazing, could take place effectively. So you can see why people live there. Space, a huge harbor. That's really important, because that's the kind of thing that brings trade from all over, because any sort of ship can get close and unload, and it's easy to do that. The hunting and fishing, of course, was mentioned, the agricultural potential. Mining, like I said, there's probably that, given there's the cliffs and mountains. There's probably is something there. It may not be anything super valuable like gold, but there's probably something. And there's stone itself is valuable. Quarries are valuable. Even that is useful. So if you magically scooped up that location and placed it south of the wall 1,000 years ago, it would be a city. It's so nice. It's because that is what almost happened in much worse conditions in the far north. like trading partners. They would have had trade with not just Eastwatch, because we know the Rangers trade with the Night's Watch, or we know the Rangers trade with the Free Folk, or at least they have in the past. They don't trade them weapons, but they trade them furs and amber and other things that are of use. Maybe fishing hooks, or who knows?
Maybe just food sometimes.
Yeah, why not?
Oftentimes, probably.
Stuff, yeah. And dragon glass could be given in trade to the Night's Watch. Things like that. There's lots of useful stuff. In fact, that would be, I was talking about what things that might be mineable up there. Very likely dragon glass in that area is available to, some setup work would probably need to be done. You can't just like hop off a boat and start harvesting dragon glass, but it's probably there. So like Bravos is nearby, like the Ibonese probably would come there. There's a lot of, there'd be a lot of potential for traffic had that gotten going.
I'm going to throw a couple things out there. When I first started researching this, when I knew we were doing this episode, I was in the back of my mind, I was like, I wonder if those Howling Caves and all this fiery destruction there could be related to some sort of volcanic activity, if maybe there's some water underground that got exposed to lava. And sure enough, that's exactly what was inspiring George. But another piece of this thought is that if they had some sort of underground warm water of some sort, that might have been another reason that people would live there. It would have been this extra sort of
good point.
Unique resource, kind of like Winterfell.
Absolutely.
Right?
Great call. Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe this is a little stretch, but if Hardhome could blow up, could Winterfell blow up? I don't know.
I don't know that there's. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's technically possible. Who can say? Like, that's...
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough
where George
mountains
is going,
nearby,
but
maybe, yeah.
there, some crazy things happen sometimes. So.
Yeah, that would be wild. Now, it looks like we got a couple of people here that added some info for us. Lolotov and Guilty Undertaker both point out that there was a manatee relative that lived in the Bering Sea called the Stellar's sea cow, but they were hunted to extinction within a few decades of their discovery by Europeans. Dang it, Europeans.
Yeah,
there are no Europeans in Hardhome, so...
But no, we did have some other people in the chat who said, that was that when they heard sea cow, they thought of the Stellar's sea cow and this, cold water manatee.
We'll score one for our very knowledgeable chatters. That was a good call right there. So that quote said halfway to becoming a town and, quote, the only settlement approaching a town. What does that mean? And I don't mean the halfway part. Well, I kind of do. But, like, what steps were not yet taken or what had not been achieved? What hurdles had not been overcome, and how many people does that mean? What is halfway to a town in terms of population? Like 200, 300, 400? I've looked this up. There is no universal definition for what makes a town or a village. There are some attempts at codifying this, but it's a ridiculous endeavor in some ways. I appreciate any attempts to standardize certain things that aren't like a matter of personal belief, but this has been done so many different ways by so many different cultures in history. It's not like you can just start over with some new system,
In my mind, I'll tell you at least a piece of what makes a town. And there are a lot of factors because I think just the straight population is one. But even that, it's got to be the population per square acre or whatever.
Oh, the density has to be included in it.
Right.
Okay.
It's a piece of it. Straight population, the density of the population. But I think maybe even more key than those, connected to all those, though, is that there are people who aren't responsible for producing their own food. There's enough food being produced by the population in general that some people start to specialize in being blacksmiths or horse traders or on and on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, specialization is one thing that city brings, yes, or towns or villages, yes. Close-knit societies or living arrangements enable that, yeah. That's a very good way to think about it. So in some ways, they had this. They wouldn't have had a lot of close-by land routes with trade, lots of trade, but they would have had a lot of potential ship trade, or at least a decent amount of that, and not a huge population to feed. It's large for Hardhome, or it's large for Beyond the Wall, but if we're talking a few hundred people, that's not some massive amount of food they're having to find on a regular basis. But it is significant. That would still matter.
And they may be able to get massive amounts of food if they're able to fish and
hunt.
Different other larger sea creatures can provide more food. And if there's more fertile land from the volcanic area around, who knows, thousands of millions of years past might have made this land more fertile. And maybe if they even had some warming mechanism underneath to get them more water or more better crop production and so on. I don't think it's hard to believe that they were making a lot of food and had I think it might be more. I think Nina makes some comments in our document that for better or worse, they had this split power, and no one entity was strong enough to completely hold Hardhome, at least not yet. But it was big enough for 4 different people to be sharing power. So that means I don't think it could have been like 38 or even 380. I think if 4 different chieftains, I think that one implies that there was a good number of people and a good number of resources.
Yeah.
But also maybe that it was a little spread out too. It wasn't quite dense enough for one person to be able to control all of it. It was spread out a little. But over time that would grow. If it hadn't been curtailed, that probably would have grown into a solid town, if not a city.
Agree, yeah, definitely. And in some ways, it's I don't want to go too far with this comparison, but I want to think of Ashai and how Ashai, you could make lots of money by delivering food there because they have tons of gold and gems, but hardly any food. So like the price of gold and gems drops massively and the price of food goes way up. And that's to a lesser extent what would happen there. Now they might have, like you said, might have plenty of local food. It might not be much of an issue. But in winter and in other times where it's hard, people could probably make a lot of money bringing food there and trading it for dragonglass and fur and amber and things that are that relatively plentiful there that would be rare in other parts of the world. Someone like Valyrians might pay a lot for some of that stuff just because it's rare. Like, oh, it's like you got rich people that want to own things from far away places, and it's like, oh, this is an exotic, this is werewood from beyond the wall. Like, ooh, they're having their dinner party and people could be like all entranced and bedazzled by these far away objects,
I mean, that's why the world becomes interconnected. That's why ships wanted to sail around Africa and Marco Polo wanted to go to China. And sometimes it is almost like a prestige thing to have something rare. But sometimes there's just some food that doesn't grow around you, pepper, or, something that usually for most of history, people were just eating the food that could grow right around them. And it was a very limited diet. And now we get, sushi for lunch and lasagna for dinner and don't think twice about it. But imagine how special it would be to have some unique new food. And I don't know if it would have been necessarily food coming from Hardhome, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a royal prestige thing.
Wine, as simple as that. Wine. They cannot make grapes up there. And they love wine. Like, this is a consistent thing with, like, one loved the wine. Like, Mance and Tormund were like, oh, that's the one thing they do really well is that wine. That's the one thing they denigrate everything. Except, like, actually, but their wine is good. That's the one thing we like. So, Nina, like you said, Nina pointed out a smart thing here, which is that this consistency of the South is what enables towns. Like, you have families that have existed and held land for generations, if not thousands of years. And that consistency of leadership has enabled the stability of those towns. Like Duskendale has been there a long time, and it, for the most part, has been stable and has been led by the same people. Barrowton, very similar. White Harbor, all these places they haven't really changed hands, right? Maybe temporarily, but they've been very stable. Hardhome doesn't have that stability because it doesn't have this large government body sort of protecting it and keeping it stable, keeping that bottom line
establishing
going.
Rules. People know what they can count on. They're confident that if I build this farm, I'm only going to be taxed X%, and if I get attacked by bandits, the local lords will send protection to me. And you can be sure of what's going to happen with your plans and your family and your land and such.
Absolutely. So let's move on. Let's get a take. We got a quote here from a maester, and unfortunately we don't know when this was, but it's pretty cool. Quote.
I want so bad to know when this was, by the way.
I know, me too. It's just, we have no idea.
A most fascinating account of Hardhome can be found in Maester Willis's Hardhome, an account of 3 years spent beyond the wall among savages, raiders, and woods witches. Willis journeyed to Hardhome on a Pentoshi trader and established himself there as a healer and counselor so that he might write of their customs. He was given the protection of Gorm the Wolf, a chieftain who shared control of Hardhome with 3 other chiefs. Can I just say, I love hearing about maesters doing ethnographies. That is so cool.
This is way cooler than the maesters who spend their entire career at the Citadel and don't have much like field experience. This guy is like, oh no, I'm in the field. This is Indiana Jones.
Yeah, no, yeah, this guy, I mean, he literally embedded himself into the community so that he could he could
be a part of it
he
rather
could be a
than just
part of
study it from
yeah.
afar.
Yeah, exactly. He did it right. Anyways,
Study it from within,
a lot
yeah.
of respect to Maester Willis.
Yeah, we like Maester Willis. We
Even
stand
if-
Maester Willis
Although
here.
he does title his ethnography Among Savages Raiders, so
that was just his
shade.
clickbait title to get Southerners to read it.
Yeah, I don't think that title would have passed.
Yeah, well, none of the people
review.
beyond the wall could read anyway. They're like, what is that, a book? I was like, yeah. He's like, what does it say? It says, I love the free folk. That's what the title is. The free folk are the best people in the world, is what it says.
Yeah, no, you got to start with the savages. You got to pull them in, draw them in, and
They're like,
then
yeah,
they
we are.
read it.
It's like, what do you mean? That's not it's like modern PC culture. They're like, what do you mean savages? That's not an insult. We are savages. What are you talking about?
I was gonna say someone might take pride in their savagery.
Yeah, like I like it when they call me a savage. Yeah, I was like, yeah, it might be an insult to you, but to him, he likes it.
That's
yeah.
right. I'm a woods witch. Don't you forget it.
So he's. Does anyone get the vibe that Gorm the Wolf might have been a skin changer? I mean, the Wolf. I mean, that's just a nickname. It could be anything, but like, maybe
so.
he could have been
think so.
Might give him a little more clout, you know, might make him a little more powerful as a chieftain, you know. So he went there on a Pentashi trader. He went apparently from Old Town all the way up there. It gives you an idea of how many trade ships used to go there. Like, that really seems like it was regular and normal, and things have changed, you know. Like we said, Hardhome was destroyed 600 years ago, so this story of Willis and Gorm is older than that. That's all we can say. It's more than 600 years old. So it's not hard to see how Gorm would have benefited from this arrangement, right? This is a maester we're talking about. A maester. He knows how to heal, and he knows things about science, and lots of knowledge that Gorm could benefit from. And yeah, that seems useful to have.
I mean, it doesn't help much, but it does narrow the time down somewhat, knowing that it was a maester. It had to be since there were maesters.
Yeah,
right?
although maesters have been
be
around a
older than
long
that.
time. But yeah,
True,
you're
true.
right. So this isn't like 8,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But
somewhere between 600 years and 6,000 years.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. We narrowed it down. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Man, imagine if it was, I don't know, 630 years, right? Like, because we know he tries to go back.
Yeah.
And it may be just out of curiosity, but I also can't help but wonder if he came back and compared notes with something at the Citadel and realized, oh crap, every 600 years a volcano goes off in Hardhome, or, something like that. If he pieced something together and realized something might be happening there, and you need to go do something about it, or maybe the value of dragon glass, or who knows?
Imagine if volcanoes were cyclical like that, like every 600 years, just gonna. It's like, time to move. It's 599 years. So
yeah, we would wait till the 599th year.
Yeah, people would wait till the last minute. Yeah, it's like maybe it could be early, y'all. You might want to get moving. Like, how sure are you of that calendar? Like, 600 years is a long time for something to get off there. So yeah, so obviously Gorm could benefit from having a maester on his side, just the healing part, let alone the other knowledge of maybe metallurgy, or who knows what other specialties this maester had, or what else he had studied. And what does Gorm have to do? Just give the guy a place to sleep and some food and his protection, which he already, presumably, that's not hard for him. Like, we know wildling leaders lead by strength. They follow powerful leaders. There's very little reason to doubt it was different 700 years ago, or however long ago this was. So, in fact, it may have been more like that. How if that's even possible to be more like that. But so yeah, so a good mutually beneficial arrangement, I think.
Yeah, it would have been an interesting novelty for the town and for Gorm. Like, certainly there'd be a mix of opinions, but I'm thinking about Ragnar and the priest that he kind of took under his wing.
Oh, from Vikings. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is kind of similar, yeah, where the person kind of learns to get along, and everybody knows not to mess with him, because then you have to mess with Gorm or Ragnar or whatever. You're like, yeah, don't mess with that guy.
But the insights and stories, just like the maester wants to bring all this knowledge back home, and it'll be interesting and novel, and to everyone, he gets to bring knowledge to them too.
They would,
they would also be entertained and intrigued by,
to continue using examples from other fandoms and other properties. Like, picture C-3PO telling stories to the Ewoks. Like, this maester would have some stories to tell. They would appreciate it. And they would, like you said, they would have stories to tell him, and he would be like rapt and trying to write it all down and be like, yeah, this is good stuff. So this arrangement of 4 chiefs ruling Hardhome, it seems like that was probably normal. The way it's written, it seemed like it was a standard division. Maybe it wasn't always 4, but maybe that was normal-ish. Until we hear otherwise, that's the assumption we have to work on. But it kind of feels like gangs dividing territory, cartels sort of like unofficially dividing what's theirs and what isn't. It's not some government that has made this division, but it is sort of held in place by the strength of the people that are upholding the system in the first place, the leaders, the chiefs, right? So it works in its own way, but there can be more chaos or a churn, to use the Expanse as yet another. When there's a change at the top, there can be a lot of trickle down violence.
There would be less stability over generations, which would hold it back from growing into a bigger town or city.
Yeah.
But I think it arose because there were so many resources there. It attracted so many people. And I think eventually those 4 chieftains would have evolved into something more centralized.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, things like a king beyond the wall. If you can have a king beyond the wall, if that can happen, then surely someone can seize full control of Hardhome. You know, it apparently just didn't happen.
It would probably take war. It'd probably take some time. There'd be some back and forth conflicts, but
which might look a bit like some of the examples used before. It might look like one cartel gaining dominance over a region where previously several cartels did, or like gang turf wars kind of thing.
And by the way, it might also look like, I don't know, half of Westeros.
Sure.
Hundreds or thousands of years ago, too, right?
Yeah, depending on how long
these towns went through these struggles of control and dominance and back and forth. You know?
Yeah, because back in the days of 7 or dozens or 100 kingdoms, there was lots and lots of war. You may have had regions of pockets of peace and areas that were relatively safe, but maybe not a lot of those. Another thing I think of is like the pirate cities, the pirate towns of different places around the world. Usually, like we think of in America, we often think of the Caribbean, because that's where piracy in this part of the world had its peak. But there would be other places like Madagascar and the Red Sea where piracy was big. And there were pirate spots that have fences and bars and brothels and all that sort of thing. Black Sails is a good show that shows a lot of that, semi-historically accurate there. So they'd be safer in a lot of ways, and less safe in other ways. Like it's sort of the difference between like a black market and a market that's heavily given laws and restrictions and stuff like that. In some ways that makes it better, in some ways it, depending. So you might, like, if Davos lived in that era, he'd have definitely gone to Hardhome and traded there. He might have been frequently. In fact, when he in his youth, he did that anyway as a sailor on someone else's ship. So it's a very safe assumption. So I try to imagine this place at its peak, whatever that was. We don't know what its peak was. We tried to guess like several hundred people, maybe 1,000 people, maybe more. I really do picture people coming from all over the globe, maybe even as far as Ashai, maybe even farther. I don't know. But Valyria, sure, why not? Valyria would come there. They like dragonglass jewelry, amber, werewood. There'd be stuff, furs, exotic things, maybe even the occasional, rugged adventurer type would go there from Valyria, like sail their fancy Valyrian ship with their retainers and do stuff. I don't know. Go hunting in the woods beyond the wall. Like, I want to hunt bear beyond the wall, You never know what these like ultra rich people are going to want to do for fun, right?
Just ask the sea snake.
You see, good example. The sea snake did go there. That's a very good example. Of course, he went after it was destroyed, so we don't know. He's not a good example of someone that would have seen it at its peak, but still, he is.
But it's still a good example, kind of like Davos. Even after it was destroyed, they still went there. So, probably would have gone beforehand.
Absolutely, yes. You're very right. So, just imagine a city that existed more than 600 years ago, and they probably did trade with Hardhome. It's just kind of hard to imagine, that this place was bustling like that. There were ships just sailing up there, but we have every reason to believe that was the case. And just like mammoth pelts or giant's bones, like there really are a lot of cool stuff that rich people that collect things would want. Unique things. Very, it's not just. Yeah, you can easily underestimate that because the free folk are poor. That doesn't, those things, because you can't spend those things, but the right collector comes along and was willing to pay a lot for some of those things. But with Hardhome having a port, that was possible. Now, where are they going to go? I want to buy your mammoth bones, but I have no idea where to go for. There's no market for this. Yeah. So the constant warring amongst the free folk was also present at Hardhome. We're told this is kind of how the tale of Maester Willis wound down. Quote,
When Gorm was murdered in a drunken brawl, however, Willis found himself in mortal danger and made his way back to Old Town. There, he set down his account, only to vanish the year after the illuminations were done. It was said in the Citadel that he was last seen at the docks, looking for a ship that would take him to Eastwatch by the sea.
So his maesterly duty, his oath, kind of brought him back to record his knowledge and pass it down to future generations, which is basically that's kind of the oath of the historian there. That's kind of your quote-unquote job. But once that was done, once he did his duty, he's like, my heart is calling you back. Dances with wildlings. This is what I'm thinking here. Nina says Sorella, when Oberyn took her, Tyene, and Arianne to a long-abandoned town in Dorne, Sorella turned over rocks and brushed sand off the mosaics, wanted to know everything about the people who lived there. She was very curious about history, yeah. So, yeah, Willis as well. He wants to know all the stuff. This is his life's interest. Jon, too. I mean, Jon also has that understood that call of Beyond the Wall. He lived with the free folk and he liked it. He respected them, and ultimately his duty was more powerful. But who knows where his story will end up? Obviously, if you look at the TV show, that is where he ended up. Mance Rayder, another example. Born to the Watch, but felt the call. Became the king beyond the wall, but felt it big time.
Called the wildlings.
Yes, exactly. All right. So, as we have said, this is maybe even Nina wants to shout out Maester Willis. This is the Order of Maesters in its purest and best form. People who genuinely love study and knowledge and want to share their expertise with future generations. Yeah, we all love this guy. 3 cheers for Maester Willis. I mean, the only other guy I can think of that's really like this is Marwyn. Like, Marwyn is like, oh, that's what happened? I'm getting on a ship right now and leaving. Like, he's just ready to go to sail across the world at the drop of a hat. That is so the opposite of, well, just most people. Like, yeah. Not just maesters, just everyone, really. Like, very few people are like that. Like, yeah, I just got back. I'm going across the world. I'm out of here. I'm heading back to, like, Slaver's Bay. Just there's a ship. I'm going now. Yeah. Why waste any time? Like, that takes a special kind of person to do that. But I respect it quite a bit. So, something tells me Maester Willis wouldn't have been one of those maesters saying the giants are extinct beyond the wall. Like, no, he's quite sure they're not. But, again, more than 600 years ago, so it's not like his writings have a lot of bearing on what isn't currently extinct anymore.
You know, it didn't occur to me until just now. He might have had a kid up there.
Oh my goodness!
For a couple of years, right?
You're right, and the
relationship. And
he's allowed to, whereas he wouldn't have been. Yeah. That might have been part of the reason he wanted to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I one thought like maybe he had a love, or I like the kid idea, all that. I still think I like the idea. I like the romanticism of him being just a true ethnographer, a true folklorist, I like that idea a little bit more than that he had personal ties, which also I think is totally valid interpretation.
It could have been both. Yeah.
I mean, it could have been both. I'm just saying that when I weighed the options, I decided to throw that option out because I personally liked the headcanon more, that he was just that passionate.
Right on. So many of the same maesters and archmaesters would doubt even what Willis wrote, because that's just doesn't fit their worldview. Like, they would maybe guess that he was making things up, or kind of be skeptical about whether some of these things really happened. And the quote, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, that too might have been another motivation to go back, to bring back some proof. Like,
oh yeah,
here's a dragon bone.
Okay.
Like, he might have had to scurry out of there quick if there was some conflict with the chieftains. He didn't have the same ally. He writes all this down, and Mage's like, "Get out of here, giants!" And he's like,
let me go get some
I'll
bones.
be right back.
Yeah.
But let me bring you some evidence,
yeah. So, and we see this a lot in A Song of Ice and Fire. There's several characters who you could call who could fit into the category of intelligent and competent skeptic, who is very much wrong. Right? Like Maester Luwin. Yeah. Or Tyrion. Tyrion's a great example. He's like, snarks and grumpkins, blah, 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 come on. But when he went to the wall, he felt a little differently. Once he stood atop the wall, he planned to pee off the wall, but he didn't, because he was awed by it. He was too, it felt wrong. He was like, wow, actually, that is vast and scary, and maybe there are things out there. And the perfect example of reading about it on a page versus experiencing just a sliver of it, and it totally changes how you think about it. So, let's talk about what happened to it. The Doom of Hardhome. It's pretty obvious why I call it that, because it has a lot in common with the Doom of Valyria on a smaller scale. We're not talking about 14 volcanoes. It appears to be just one. But here's what we're told. Quote,
Hardhome had been halfway toward becoming a town, the only true town north of the wall, until the night 600 years ago when hell had swallowed it. Its people had been carried off into slavery or slaughtered for meat, depending on which version of the tale you believed. Their homes and halls consumed in a conflagration that burned so hot that watchers on the wall far to the south had thought the sun was rising in the north. Afterward, ashes rained down on haunted forest and shivering sea alike for almost half a year. Traders reported finding only nightmarish devastation where Hardhome had stood, a landscape of charred trees and burned bones, waters choked with swollen corpses, blood-chilling shrieks echoing from the cave mouths that pocked the great cliff that loomed above the settlement.
of course, they don't call it the Doom of Hardhome, but, it works. As a title, it's a micro version of that. And it does predate the Doom of Valyria, don't forget. This was 600 years ago, as it says, where the Doom was more like 410. So about 200 years apart. Now, ashes raining down for half a year is a very strong giveaway that this was a volcano. The visual reports of a conflagration, the sun rising in the north, back that up. Though clearly it wasn't to the level of absolute apocalyptic devastation. It didn't sink the continent below the waves or anything like that. And there weren't any earthquakes that we know of. There might have been some tidal waves, but we don't hear that. It's entirely possible, if not likely, but they wouldn't necessarily have been huge. Just something. So, but despite all the evidence of volcano, it doesn't have to be only a volcano. We can't just say eruption, and that covers it. It doesn't cover all the bases. For example, like, what's this deal about people carried off into slavery or slaughtered for meat? Like, volcanoes don't do that. That's people do that, not volcanoes, right? So
I chalk that up to follow-up stories
Yes.
and rumors being told,
I agree.
Although it could also be partly true. Like, if there was a community of sorts there that got mostly destroyed, some of the leftover people might have ended up being sold into slavery, or like we hear at Hardhome now that they're eating their own dead.
Yes.
So,
it may be just that may have looked like the story may have come out as outsiders came in to cannibalize them, where it may have been they just were forced into it on their own. And it could have been like opportunistic Skegosi who heard about this and were like, let's go. Cooked humans. That's even better. They're already cooked for us.
And also, it's already part of free folk culture to kidnap young women. If they can't stop me, then I get it. It's like we or the rest of Westeros or whatever would perceive that as taken into slavery, potentially, at least.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it might have just been natural fallout of that culture up there that we just added our own names. Plus, it gets embellished and made more scary or interesting stories and rumors and everything.
So the presence of bodies alone is interesting, though, because you would think that if it was like lots of lava flow, like there wouldn't be any bodies left. They would have been consumed, right? But volcanoes don't always have lava. That's something that you have to divorce from your mind. It's not always the case. They often do, but not always. A lot of eruptions are when magma builds up enough pressure to burst forth, and that magma becomes lava. But not always, right? Here are some contenders for a natural explanation. A phreatic eruption is when magma, trapped underground, comes into contact with an underground water source. So you got hot magma hitting water, and that creates a huge amount of steam, and that creates a new volcano. It can come from like flat ground or just hills because of the pressure, but it's the steam that's escaping, not any sort of magma or lava. That's what bursts forth. So a phreatomagmatic eruption is the same, except that some magma escapes, but in the form of ash. And the Hardhome event is characterized by ash falling for half a year. So in my mind, my non-volcanic scientist, what is that called? What is a volcanic scientist called? I forget. There's like It's a Vulcan, right? Yeah, you're called a Vulcan. No,
Volcanist?
volcanologist. I don't remember. Anyway, this seems like a very strong contender. There's other two contenders that I'm aware of. A Plinian eruption, which is like Mount St. Helens or Vesuvius or Krakatoa. And the reason it's called Plinian is because the famous Roman author and natural philosopher Pliny the Elder was killed in the Vesuvius eruption. He was trying to save a friend and their family, apparently. But he was so out of shape that he like collapsed and they couldn't pick him up, and he just died of the gases, apparently. There's a couple different accounts of it. But anyway, so it's similar, except the sudden steam pressure that happens from the water and the magma comes from gases that are already in the magma. So there's additional chemistry going on there, and that causes the reaction to be larger. And that's why you have superheated ash and gas that incinerates everything in its path. But that's too high a level of destruction. Like something like Vesuvius or Krakatoa just left nothing. It was like just a wasteland. That's more like the Doom. There was still bodies and the trees were still there. So, I mean, there was fires, but it didn't burn everything. So there's still ruins, right? That's implies a lesser level of devastation.
And/or that Hardhome spans a lot of land, which is why I was thinking might make it harder to build a townscape, or why it might have had 4 leaders. But I still agree with you that I think it wasn't quite as massive as what's the word? Plinian?
Plinian.
That type of
just Plinian.
Plinian?
Yeah. There was another called a Pelian eruption. These names are all too similar. Plinian, Pelian. Yeah. This is when a volcanic dome collapses onto itself and then shoots everything way up in the air. And it rains hot ash and fire powerful enough to burn trees and take down walls and stuff, but it isn't complete absolute obliteration. So that one's a strong contender possible, and especially because there isn't an active volcano apparently there anymore. It does have the screaming caves, or still vents apparently, but anyway, we're not entirely sure. Just some good examples there. Krakatoa had what was called the burning ashes of Ketimbang. Ketimbang was a city or a town that was wiped out by this. And it was hot ash that killed thousands of people. Just ash, just superheated ash that killed thousands of people. An entire island called Sebesi lost its population of 3,000 because of this hot ash. So this is very similar to what took out Hardhome. And this is where it gets really insane. And where you could see, like, imagine this in a superstitious society, or any society. What would this look like to you? Okay, so a year later, volcanic rafts made of pumice. So the lava, the magma hits the water and it solidifies, and it doesn't necessarily sink because it's porous enough and soft enough. Turns into basically a raft. Rafts of these pumice were made after Krakatoa and started floating west. Many of them turned up on the east coast of Africa. A year later, some of them had skeletons on them. Picture that. You're just sitting there hanging out on the beach, fishing, whatever, and pumice, like black rafts with skeletons, just float up on you out of nowhere. Like, what are you gonna think? Like, this is one of those examples of, yeah, George R. Martin doesn't need to invent anything for this. That sounds like fantasy, but it's real world.
And God forbid if it was a full moon or a solar eclipse or something within that same week.
Or a
whatever,
comet had passed by.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like, oh man, yeah, good luck.
I've forgotten some of the names, some of the words to describe this, but another thing that can happen with a volcano is that, as the lava and resulting land flow, it's sometimes water's involved. It can just push all this mass of earth and material, trees and dirt and everything into the water, and it can be congealed and buoyant enough to float. Mm-hmm. And I seem to remember that there was a volcano that made one of these. There's a word for this, and it was like a square mile, and it floated like hundreds of miles away. Jeez. Too. Like, it's just crazy the weird things that volcanoes can cause, and how people in less educated times or areas would have interpreted this, what it would have meant, and then add that to this world where there really is magic, right? Yeah. There really is magic and dragons and such. To account
for that, yeah.
Like, right, and we're sort of like thinking about the real world things that could have caused this, and Martin was even inspired by a real world thing that caused a similar thing with the Howling Caves and all. But it doesn't mean in this world there couldn't have also been something mystical mixed up in it.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Caused it or came
like
from
the Doom,
it or
we
whatever
make
else.
the same sort of guesses that seem very valid. Yeah. And so when you hear that description of Hardhome, it sounds all crazy and fantastical. It's not that different from the descriptions of Krakatoa. And in fact, there's nothing as crazy as pumice boats crewed by skeletons, in George's description. Like, I don't think anything rises to that level of what? Anyway. Yeah, so the Screaming Caves, the Howling Caves. What about that? What's the explanation for that? Well, let's start with a quote.
Cotter Pike's galleys sail past Hardhome from time to time. He tells me there is no shelter there but the caves. The Screaming Caves, his men call them.
So the Screaming Caves from the caves could be steam, so they should be maybe called Steaming Caves. Shout out to Nobody Suspects the Butterfly. Nina reminded me of this post that she did way back when, and it was very informative, and I followed up on it and added to it. I learned some more, extended beyond this, so that was a good time. Back in 2004 on the Westeros.org forums, there was a thread about George R. R. Martin's visit to New Zealand and Rotorua Park. Supposedly, George said this inspired a location at the books at that time. Again, 2004, which hadn't happened yet. Right, so this is what I said at the beginning. It's like he was inspired to create this location over a decade before Dance with Dragons, and this is it. And when you hear the description in a second here, you will understand why it's a dead ringer for Hardhome. Author James Henry Carey Nichols wrote a book called The King Country, which is named after a region in New Zealand also called, well, King Country. Quote,
"Just beyond Waikanapanapa, we entered a rocky, desolate gorge, seamed and fissured in every direction with streams of hot water, while jets of hissing steam bursting from its sides marked the site of subterranean fires. The heated, quaking soil was covered with thick deposits of silica, sulfur, oxide of iron, pumice, obsidian, scoria, and other volcanic products. And with its sulfurous atmosphere, fierce heat, and shrieking sounds, it appeared as we entered it like a shortcut to pandemonium. One of the most remarkable wonders of this region was Te Ana Taipo, or the Devil's Hole, a deep a deep circular aperture in the rocky gorge, from which a column of transparent steam burst from a small aperture at the bottom of the deep funnel-shaped hole, with a deafening screeching sound like the voices of 1,000 fiends. Never was heard anything so wild and so dismal as the human-like wailings of Te Ana Taipo. And as the thrilling noise went echoing over the hills, one expected to see an army of evil spirits spring up around, headed by his satanic majesty himself.
There you have it. Screaming Caves indeed. The Devil's Hole. Unnatural sounding, but quite natural in truth. Subterranean fires, fierce heat, etc., etc. Very similar. That quote, expected to see an army of evil spirits spring up around, headed by his satanic majesty himself. That's basically what happens at Hardhome. The army of evil spirits shows up. It's ice instead of fire. There's no Night King in the book, but in the show even has the Satan, like the guy with horns, like even that part is represented. And Ashea, you're a Hawaiian person. You probably noticed some of these language similarities to the Maori. Maori Hawaiian. They're both Polynesian. So
yeah, to be clear, when Aziz says that, I'm born and raised in Hawaii. I
Right.
don't really call myself a Hawaiian person, but I am born and raised there. And so yes, all of these words are very similar. There's Waikanapanapa versus this New Zealand version, Waikanapanapa, which are very similar, and you'll see tons of similar words across both regions.
You can't see those words.
Honestly, the story of these wailing spirits springing around reminds me of the Night Watchers in Hawaii, actually, which is like
Night Watchers.
the night Marchers.
Night
Sorry,
Marchers, okay.
I think I misspoke, but yeah, it's just kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah.
It's kind of self-explanatory, but it's the idea of these deadly ghosts of like tribal, Hawaiian warriors who like march, It just, anyways, it just makes me think of that.
That sounds pretty neat. So, yeah, like you can't see those words, but Waianapanapa and Waikanapanapa really are just a K different. They're the exact same spelling with just the K inserted there. So, yeah, Polynesians discovered Hawaii 1,500 years ago and New Zealand about 800 years ago. So those are both Polynesian people. Some of you may have heard that Jason Momoa, of course, Khal Drogo, who is Hawaiian, also performed a traditional haka as part of his audition for Khal Drogo. Haka is an intense dance normally associated with war or funerals or weddings. The haka is also a tradition in New Zealand, so another connection between those two peoples that have a similar origin. Now, here's a crazy footnote about that quote from our author James Henry Carey Nichols on The King Country. That account was written in 1884. Now, in 1886, Mount Tarawera erupted. The next paragraph of that quote mentions Mount Tarawera and the pink and white terraces, because he went there before Mount Tarawera exploded, less than 2 years apart. So we talked about Mount Tarawera almost exactly 2 years ago on 3/20/22 in an episode about Valyria. We talked about the Doom, and this was the last time that we talked about real life volcanoes. At the time, we said we'd come back to this when it was time for Hardhome. And the pink and white terraces were overwhelmed by Tarawera and thought destroyed. They've been recently rediscovered. They're considered an eighth world wonder. So people thought they were destroyed, but they're actually just buried under all this ash.
So if 2 years from now some volcano goes off,
watch out. Yeah.
Ooh, maybe 2 years from now, when's the winters are going to come on? Maybe there's got to be some meaning here, right?
Yeah, something. So that's pretty wild, right? That we talked about that, and this guy witnessed it 2 years before. So I pointed that out to Butterfly on her blog there, that this guy was 2 years before that eruption, which is also an inspiration for George. So moving forward with this topic, the most active geothermal area in the region is called Tikitere, or Tikitir, I don't know how to say it, from a story where a Maori princess threw herself in this like volcanic lake and killed herself rather than continue to bear her abusive husband. Westerners have nicknamed it Hell's Gate, thanks to author George Bernard Shaw, who gave all sorts of names to all sorts of features down there, which George R.R. Martin in turn read and appreciated and incorporated a bit. For example, he named some of these like hot springs that you can bathe in Sodom and Gomorrah, Devil's Bath, names like that. Now, back to Rotorua. This is where George visited. It's on the northern of the two major New Zealand islands, and it means second lake or crater lake in Maori. It's also nicknamed Sulphur City or Rotten Rua or Roto Vegas because it has a strip, but because of the smell of sulfur, right? So, circling all that back to Hardhome, it's said that the Screaming Caves are the only shelter in the area. So imagine this, like we have this very real example in New Zealand of Screaming Caves, of steam escaping through vents that are too small for all the steam to come through at once. So it creates all this sound. Okay, so if you have these caves as shelter, yeah, it keeps the rain and some of the cold off you. But can you imagine sleeping in that with those steam? Like, it's probably really loud. And given you don't have the, like, scientific knowledge to tell you, oh, it's just steam. What are you gonna think? You're a free folk person beyond the wall like that. I don't think you would sleep in there. It might just be too loud anyway. Forget, like, even if it was, again, rock in a hard place type stuff. You sleep out in the cold and exposure. You sleep in the screaming. Like what? Ice and fire again. Like you're steamed into insanity or you're frozen to death. I don't know. Yeah, it's just poor free folk. That's all I got to say about that. They're doomed. Like Melisandre says, they are a doomed people. When you read stuff like that, you're like, yeah, Melisandre's probably not wrong. In our fandom, there's a lot of theories about Hardhome. Like what happened there. Most of them aren't so scientific in nature, but we're open to supernatural being rolled up into this. Like a supernatural cause, supernatural trigger or supernatural fallout could be part of this. Right? Something could have encouraged that volcano to go off. It's still a volcano, but something could have, given it a push. Add a little extra fuel to the fire, for lack of a better word. So one idea that's permeated the fandom is that the Faceless Men did it as a test run for the Doom. I'm not too big on that idea. I think it's clever, but these things are 200 years apart. There's no evidence the Faceless Men can do that. And we think what happened was the Faceless Men assassinated enough of the Blood Mages, the sorcerers who were responsible for holding it all back. So it was like removing the safeguards. They didn't literally trigger it. They just undid the seals that were holding it back. So I don't know how they could have done that same sort of thing at Hardhome. It doesn't really work. So given
why they would have.
Yeah, why would they blow up? Well, again, it's a test run to see if it would work. If they could blow up this place, then they could blow up Valyria, But
like, why would they have chosen Hardhome?
Because it's a volcano. Just because it's a volcano. Like, where else are they going to get volcanoes?
But how did they even know it was a volcano?
Well, there's plenty of ways you can figure that out.
And aren't there other volcanoes that wouldn't endanger all these people's lives?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, I'm with you. I don't really think it's that great of a theory. It's clever, but I don't think it works. I don't think it holds up under scrutiny. But again, I like to be thorough, raise these topics in order to address them. So, yeah, and what about that stuff about people carried off into slavery and all that? We addressed some of it, but like the cannibals coming from Skagos just to take advantage of weakness. Same thing for slavers. Like they might have... The conflagration was visible for hundreds of miles, so like word would have gotten out, and some people might have understood what that meant. Like, okay. And trading ships showed up there regularly anyway. So maybe just they're on their normal route. They show up at Hardhome and they're like, whoa, something has changed here. This place has been devastated. Oh, but here's some survivors that we can enslave. Something like that. And then over time, the story, you could easily see how the story became that they intentionally did this. Well, I mean, they did intentionally take the people, but they didn't know before they got there necessarily what would have happened.
Yeah, a ship that, was a 2-month sail away, by the time they wouldn't have known when they left, they got there, what was going to have happened.
Yeah.
And even if that ship didn't take slaves, when they go back to wherever they came from, that story will spread. Slavers here, then well, let's go check this out. Maybe they're vulnerable.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it's the same. And Nina also points out a very straightforward and smart point, which is that it's easy to imagine that sort of thing happening at Hardhome 600 years ago because it's happening there now. There are a bunch of people there trapped and starving, and people are carrying them off into slavery. Hello. Okay, so it's history repeating itself, not some strange first ever example of this.
And remember, too, how the ashes were falling for months or a year or something, right? So this would have been whatever happened and what's happening there would have been gone on for a while, right?
Yes.
That makes sense. It wasn't
time
like
for word to spread. Yeah.
Right. It's not. There's a volcano on Monday, and on Tuesday, everyone's taking a slave, and then on Wednesday, it's back to normal. This would have been a process that spread out for months and years, maybe.
Yes.
Oh. And the rippling rumors of what the reality what happened, the rumors would have spread for even generations, and it would have been embellished and exaggerated. So
now, if you want to get a little extra conspiratorial about the others and showing up there, one of the reasons it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of human souls there, and they want to take that. They want to capture those, kill those people, and make them undead slaves. A different form of slavery, right? We've many times touched on that allegory between regular slavery and undead slavery and how similar they are. But if there is dragonglass, like unearthed, shot closer to the surface because of that eruption, the others might not want anyone getting to that. They might want to kind of, cut that off. I don't know if that's just how they think, or if they really think at all. But there does seem to be some intelligence there, and they know what's... I'm pretty sure they understand what their weaknesses are. It's not like Superman doesn't... It's like Superman not understanding what kryptonite is. He's like, I don't know, that's... All of a sudden I got really weak. I don't understand why. Like, wasn't it kryptonite? Like, what? Like, the others are aware of that dragonglass melts them. I don't think they're surprised when that happened. Like, oh, I didn't know that could happen. So, it's entirely possible that's wrapped up in here, but I wouldn't go too far with that. But it's a worthy idea.
Here's another thought that I might be reaching. I don't really believe this, but just an interesting consideration. That what if it was the others holding back this volcanic explosion? What if there's some other presence there? And for some reason they left. And when they did, the coldness left with them. The magma was allowed to be released.
Interesting. It is possible.
Ensues.
Because of what we see, that their cold is enough to tamp down the fires. We do see that in Melisandre's dream, which we'll get to in the second half. So If it can tamp
Or-
down the fires now, why not
Yeah.
back then?
Or what we could be saying is, if they needed a rescue team of firefighters, the others should change to being firefighters. I
It's
think
true.
they found
They
their
can
new
just-
career.
One other could shut down a whole multi-stage fire. You're right. So here's another follow-up quote about what it's become since.
6 centuries had come and gone since that night, but Hardhome was still shunned. The wild had reclaimed the site, John had been told, but rangers claimed that the overgrown ruins were haunted by ghouls and demons and burning ghosts with an unhealthy taste for blood.
What is an unhealthy taste for blood?
It's unhealthy for you.
What is the recommended daily allowance for blood when you're a burning ghost? I mean, yeah.
3.
Did a doctor sign off on that statement, George? You know? It's a bit similar to language used in other supposedly cursed places like Harrenhal and, of course, Valyria, and the other even more volcano-blasted landscape, you know? So, yeah, the whole talk about ghosts and all that, yeah. So it's kind of standard language that gets assigned to places that are considered cursed. I'm not sure we can read too much into it other than general superstition. But if there are such thing as burning ghosts or ghouls, then, oh, yikes. This is a place they'd be, but I've never seen a ghoul in A Song of Ice and Fire. They've just been mentioned a few times.
I've seen him in Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yes, I have heard of them there. Yes, that's true. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back with a little more real-world volcano stuff, and then dig deep into the good stuff, the theories, what's going to happen, everything happening there now. Yeah. I'm a big fan of factor meals. They're very flexible for your schedule. I'm a big fan of any sort of meal plan that allows you to customize it to you rather than fitting your schedule, your eating habits to an existing thing, something that fits your life, your schedule, your preferred meals, your preferred nutrients, the things that your body wants, the things that you think are good for you. That's really valuable. Let me highlight one thing in particular that I like about Factor is their protein shakes. I don't like to stop to eat in the middle of the day. I like to either be all working or all not working. I'm not always good at that, but that's what I prefer to be. So I don't like to take long breaks for meals. I want to just like eat something quickly and then get back to making a living as quickly as I can. And the problem with that is that you often don't eat well when you do that. You often maybe skimp on the good food. Maybe you eat something quick rather than something healthy. Maybe you don't eat enough, which doesn't fuel you up enough. Factor really addresses that by having fully prepared meals that are quick, that have quality ingredients, so you're not, slacking off on nutrition, but you're still getting the food really quickly.
And if that meal doesn't fill you up, then the shake will do it. For
Oh,
sure.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
if you gotta eat that meal and drink that shake, you're not gonna want dessert after.
They're 100% ready to heat and eat. You don't have to microwave. It's not microwave food, although you can microwave. That is a valid option, but you can also just stick them in the oven. It's ready in like 8 minutes, I think it is. Surely there's a little variation there. Not everything cooks exactly the same. But I haven't seen one yet that took more than 10 minutes. So that's pretty quick. That definitely lines up with my goal of getting my food in me as quickly as possible so I can get back to work. And with a smoothie, of course, you don't even have to stop working. You just drink while you're working, just to have that be your beverage. So I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of being able to select exactly how many meals I get per week, whether they're drinks, full meals, whether they're lunches or dinners. I don't really use Factor a lot for dinner meals. It is more for an afternoon thing, because for dinner, I can take my time a little more. But it's a perfectly valid option. They have amazing dinners with high quality ingredients, the best steaks and veggies and chickens and potatoes, all the best stuff. So that's the beauty of customization. So head to factormeals.com/Westeros50. Use the code Westeros50 to get 50% off your first month plus 20% off your next month. That's code Westeros50 at factormeals.com/Westeros50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is still active. That's a great deal, folks. It's at least worth a try. If it works for you and fits your schedule, then you have discovered something new that will make you more productive and efficient. And of course, if you're making any big change to your diet, be aware that, sometimes your body might need a little adjustment. So I'm not a doctor, but we all need to keep that in mind when we're changing our habits. Your body needs a little adjustment period. Also want to shout out our Twitch streams. Every Friday, I play Crusader Kings 3 for A Song of Ice and Fire. It's an amazingly detailed module. It contains all the heraldry, all the history, all the names that you recognize, all the houses, all the geography. It is extremely well done. I'm currently playing the son of Melis the Monstrous, Maynard Blackfire, King on the Iron Throne. He's a very sadistic and cruel man, and he's executes lots of people. he killed all the high towers. He made a tower of high tower heads. Actually, his father did that, but he approved.
Can I just say, you called it a module?
Yeah, instead of a mod. I know, I said the whole word.
I think it's short for modification.
Oh,
not
really?
module.
I think of module because of D&D, like back in the day when you buy a mod. Mod was short for module, like an adventure that fit in.
Yeah.
You could
Oh, that's an interesting. So I genuinely was curious about if you had any. Anyways,
I've never heard that. I wonder if it is. Yeah, I wonder.
I think it's modification. That's what I've always assumed. I'm not confident
because it's you're modding a game.
The code is changing.
You're changing it. Whereas in your case, of a D&D module mod would be an actual.
It doesn't change
campaign.
anything. It's an add-on.
Yeah.
Anyways, that makes sense. Cool. Couple of comments from y'all. A nascent novice says, I really enjoy Sean's idea that Hardhome was quite spread out, thus the different leaders. Call back to Rome being a collection of settlements that became one city. Yeah, Rome was eventually, like a lot of ancient cities, was that there were like different sections for each tribe. And eventually that sort of, the tribal distinctions started to fall off over time. Great call. Dornish Dame says, also has me in mind of Jon at Castle Black in Dance with Dragons, thinking that Sam should be documenting all the histories and traditions and songs and languages of the free folk. Ah, yes, I forgot about that. That's a really good call. Yes, he did say that. He did value it, and that's one of the many reasons we like Jon. he cares about those things. He thinks of those things. He's like, what Lord Commander before him would have done that? Probably not none, but it's probably pretty rare attitude to hold. Dornsham also agrees that the Hardhome thing wasn't some sort of test run. It could have provided inspiration for the Facemen, given them an idea. Like maybe that, but it probably wasn't their entire doing. I agree with that.
I think that's a neat idea, though, because they could have seen, been a witness and or heard the stories, and then some gears started turning, and it might have taken a couple hundred years to piece it together, this master plan, but it would be a good inspiration.
Yeah. So last time we had occasion to discuss volcanoes on the show. As I brought up earlier, it was in March of 2022. The Hunga Tonga eruption had just happened. It was January 15th, 2022. So it had been less than 2 months old, or about 2 months old. We decided to wait to discuss it, even though it was such a great real world example. Great, not in a good way, because it was devastating, but as in a good example, as in a quality example of the point we were trying to get at and the data we're trying to get at. Because at the time, after only 2 months, the world's best scientists were still very much in progress on working on it. And it has been long enough now. Let's take 5 minutes to discuss what we learned. Shout out to Virginie, friend of the show, friend of us, friend of the community, who lived on Tonga when this occurred. And she shared quite a lot about her experience and some on-the-ground data that you normally can't get, someone who actually lived through it. So we mentioned the explosion of Mount Tarawera in 1886. That was a VEI, volcanic index of 4. Tonga was a 4 or 5 or 6. They're still debating it. But most scientists seem to think it's closer to the 6 than the 4. So maybe 5 is about right. But one of the reasons it's debated is because it's so much more data. They have the modern science. There's nothing like it. There's never been the equipment that we have now, which is so much better than what we had even 30 years ago, that the data that we get from this volcano is far beyond any that we've ever had before.
Not just the equipment, but the interconnectedness of equipment around the world.
Yes.
Right? Our ability to communicate with each other immediately and share the information and so on.
Yeah, that's a huge. You're totally right to say that, Sean. That's a huge factor, because one of the examples is when it happened, there were already people getting on the phones, getting on the internet, like shutting down ports thousands of miles away, and being prepared for it. It's like, hey, in 2 hours or so, you're going to get a tidal wave, and people would know to get out of the way. they tracked the shockwaves of Tonga through Antarctica, through holes bored in the ice. They felt they had instruments in the ice that detected it there. So yeah, you're right, Sean. There was just all over the world they were picking up data, and it's just nothing like that had ever happened when this equipment was available. So while I still think Hardhome was a Fredo-magmatic eruption, this one was definitely Plinian. It's the largest atmospheric disturbance since Krakatoa, another mention of Krakatoa, and Krakatoa was 1883, and it's the largest ever explosion recorded by almost any form of technology. Despite that, like many volcanoes, it wasn't one eruption. There was multiple eruptions, and modern science, despite all this thing, failed kind of hard here. Despite all our technology and all our tracking, there were several eruptions over 25 days, starting on the December 20th, 2021. And some scientists think it's still erupting right now, but underwater. They declared it dormant on January 11th. Oops. That was a big oops. Because it erupted again on the 14th. And then again on the 15th. And the 15th was the really big one. So they were very wrong about that. That's the one we all heard about. The other earlier ones didn't make national, global news, whatever. Or not in many places. This is the one we all heard about. This plume from the explosion on the 15th went 58 kilometers in the air. That's 36 miles.
That's incomprehensible to me. That's crazy. I mean, that's higher than anything on Earth by far.
Yeah,
that
could take out an airplane if it happened to be
yeah.
above it, which would be unlikely, but could have. There's images.
But that's way higher than airplanes fly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's images from the International Space Station of the cloud forming as it happened. So there's another example. That could never have been captured in 1880 or whatever. The sound waves were heard soon after in Samoa and Fiji, and that's 500 and 400 miles away, respectively. 2 hours later, it was heard in New Zealand. 1,200 miles away, they heard it. There were people who knew in advance to listen. They're like, you're going to hear this in 2 hours. Call here, get on the phone, say, hey, listen for this in about 2 hours. The sounds were actually heard as far away as the Yukon. 6,000 miles away, 9,700 kilometers away, the sound of Hunga Tonga erupting was heard in the Yukon. Yeah. Shockwaves, at the time we heard the shockwaves circled the globe 3 times. That's going both directions. So they go around the globe, meet, and then they go around, meet. We heard it was 3 times. It was actually 4 times. There was also a huge amounts of lightning. That's a thing that often isn't mentioned with volcanic activity. There's lots and lots and lots of lightning. There were 200,000 lightning flashes on the day of that volcano. I wonder if that happened at Hardhome or at the Doom of Valyr. Were there lots of volcanoes that day? I mean, or those days, the weeks building up? Probably, at least in some of these cases. Now, here's something contrary to what we discussed before. Everybody knows that, for the most part, volcanoes can lower global temperatures. They've done that many times. Krakatoa literally lowered all global temperatures by 1.2 Celsius, 2.2 Fahrenheit for 5 years. That's called volcanic winter, right? We've all heard of that. But it's not always the case. With Hunga Tonga, there was so much water vapor in the explosion that it caused a greenhouse effect, and it actually raised the temperature locally. It had a net warming effect on the entire planet, which is, of course, just what we need. Yes, let's make it warmer. Yeah, more global warming. Great. Yes, so yeah, good example. Yes, just because we know man-made climate change is a thing, it doesn't mean we don't think natural climate change is also a thing. They both exist, yeah. Volcanoes can cause tsunamis, though they usually don't. It's often reported they do, but that's just because some of the biggest ones often have that, but the smaller ones often don't. This was one of those exceptions, unfortunately. This was a volcano with tsunamis. 2 people were killed by a tsunami caused by Hunga Tonga in Peru. 6,700 miles away, 2 people were killed by a 6-foot-high wave, and they were in a truck, and they drowned. There was also video all over Peruvian and Chilean social media because they all knew it was coming. Like, everybody got on the horn and was like, hey, in a few hours, there's going to be giant waves. These people in this truck apparently didn't get the word or something. Anyway, 8 to 10 boats were sunk at a marina in New Zealand. How far away is New Zealand from Tonga? Well, like 6,000 miles or something like that. Yeah. A person was also killed in Fiji. And this was the following day that those boats were sunk in the marina. So a day later, the tidal wave let the waves sunk these boats. Japan had waves as high as 4 feet at Okinawa. Japan is nowhere near Tonga. But overall, this was inconsistent because it wasn't like a universal explosion in every direction. It was like some of the nearest islands didn't have any big waves at all. Yet there were waves in New Zealand and Japan. So That's wild. That should give us plenty to ponder, right? Plumes, Fredo-magmatic, Plinian, the potent power of the planet. Yeah, I got a little more alliteration in there for you. Mm-hmm. So that really gives you the power. Now let's bring that all back to Planetos, another P. The notion that volcanoes have a global impact in a variety of ways reminds us to look elsewhere besides Hardhome. One of the things we didn't include so much, that we didn't talk about, that's a big deal and it adds to the just overall horror of the situation, is that all that ash and chemicals getting evacuated from the cone, the volcano, whatever, causes massive water contamination. So all like nearby drinking water is all going to be not drinkable in the short term. So like no food and no water. I mean, that's really bad. And it's kind of funny to think about, not in a ha-ha way, that Hardhome, like you think of Hunga Tonga and Krakatoa and all these, Hardhome doesn't seem like it was necessarily as big as those. Like it was just kind of odd because George loves to go big, which he did with the Doom. So, it's not like he hasn't gone there, but Hardhome seems, pretty darn big, but it seems kind of smaller than some of these other ones. But still, people might have heard it in Bravos or Norvos or pretty darn far away. It still would have been heard and seen thousands of miles away potentially.
It also depends on how big exactly Hardhome is. Right. That's
right.
That's something we don't quite know. So it could be bigger than we realize. But
now,
and it could also have been more contained than it would have been if there were others around suppressing it with their coldness.
They could have done some good there, those others, So I don't know if there's a tsunami after Hardhome. Probably not. But if there was, it would have hit Skagos and Skane, maybe the Vale.
That's
sure.
Another thing I wish I knew. I wish there was like some consolidated timeline of all events in the world of Ice and Fire. Like that would be a monumental task to put together. But if we could pinpoint what else was happening around the world at that year, 600 years prior.
Yeah, that would be cool. Now, Dragonstone, give an example of that. Dragonstone would have been raised roughly in that era, around that same time. We can't be, again, we don't know the exact dates, but it's relatively close. So Mina has an idea here, maybe from a more human perspective. Maybe some people in Valyria heard about Hardhome and it spooked them a little bit. They're like, ooh, I don't know, maybe I don't want to live around volcanoes anymore. Not like a lot of people. Most people didn't leave, but maybe a few, or just a 0.001% of the population were like, this is bad. Maybe we should get out of here. And they moved to Dragonstone, which is also a volcano, so maybe that theory doesn't work, but they wanted to be somewhere where there was volcanic activity because it's still Valyrian. They want to have that, especially if they're worried about dragons and stuff like that in the long run. But yeah, so I mean, just think about that. Like someone in Valyria living around volcanoes sees a volcano blow up and is like, maybe I don't want to live here anymore. Either way, it could be connected. Like the idea of volcanic activity in Westeros may have drawn some people over to take a closer look.
Yeah, it could have been maybe not fear and running away, but curiosity and going to check it out. Like, what other volcanoes are there? That was a lot of power, a lot of fire. We could have done something with that heat. The blood sources or whatever might have been intrigued.
Yeah, or maybe just thinking a little more mundane. The first Valyrians we heard that showed up on Dragonstone were traders. And if they had been trying to trade up at Hardhome, and Hardhome was a place that you could no longer trade at, maybe they saw an opening for a new spot, even though it was nowhere near there. I don't know, maybe that doesn't work. But regardless, one trade hub shuts down, another opens. It might be at least tangentially related. So yeah, we mentioned it earlier, but the sea snake. He's like the only person we know of between the explosion and now that has been there. Surely there are others, rangers, maybe a maester or two, but we don't know who they are or their names. The sea snake, we do know his name. He took his ship, the Ice Wolf, there, but he wasn't going just there. He was going all over up there. He went to Eastwatch. He went to Bravos. He was trying to find a northwest passage. He was trying to find a way through and around to get to the other coast above. He never did, but it was an interesting and worthy endeavor. So yeah, let's talk about what we think is coming. And just in case you've gotten crossed up, let's review Book Hardhome, because Show Hardhome might have thrown you off a little bit. Book Hardhome is entirely off page and might stay that way. Obviously in the show, he goes there with Tormund and it made for a very popular episode. In the book, it's just Tormund given the order to go, and he might not do it because Jon gets stabbed not long after that order. Tormund hasn't left yet.
I do want to clarify. It's not exactly just Tormund. Tormund's put in charge, but it's a
Right.
contingency of
Yeah.
dozens of
Yeah.
people, mostly free folk, but
also Night's Watchmen. Yeah, it was supposed to be both. Yeah. Either way, I would set aside your concept of show Hardhome to get at these book events, though a lot of the basics do align and some of the visual elements. For example, I do expect the others to attack the refugees there. That is probably going to happen. Melisandre has a dream about it. We'll get to that. I do expect they're coming to be felt by extreme cold, which is what they always do, and seen in the form of mist, which is also in Melisandre's dream. The show gave us great gray cliffs overlooking wooden walls with flaming arrows, a huge harbor with ships, which is all right on. That's all right. That's all what we're told about book Hardhome too. So if you're trying to picture some of that, which is difficult because we don't see it on screen in the book, so it's like you kind of have to go to another source. We don't like to use the show for things like this, but it does happen to fit pretty well if you're careful with what images you use and which ones you don't. And the end result will probably be pretty similar too. A victory for the others is probably likely. Not just a win in that they defeated the humans, but in a win that they add so many new bodies to their army. The very thing Jon tells Bowen Marsh, the reason they should be concerned with Hardhome in the first place is that, the very addition to the others' army. He tells them that. He tells the other Night's Watch officers that, and they just don't really have an answer for him. They're like, the wall? It will stop them? Like, well, actually, that's not a bad answer. It might stop them, but it's still iffy. Jon's plan is iffy too, to be fair. Like, he might be chasing lost money, like chasing losses. It's too late for this. It's maybe the people at Hardhome are already doomed. You may not be able to save them. But let's talk about the dream and the letter to sort through all this. What actually happened? Go ahead.
As we do this, by the way, I didn't even talk to you about this or put it in a document, but a thought has gone through my mind that could Melisandre's vision be something from the past? She might not be seeing Hardhome now. She might be seeing Hardhome in the past. I'm not big on this. It's just something that occurred to me, especially because she misinterprets things a lot. But I don't know why George would have her have this vision if it wasn't immediately meaningful.
Well, let's just talk about
Unless that. Unless it's something to prompt Jon to go.
Let's talk about that when we get to that part.
Okay.
So Jon decides he's going to Hardhome. He decides he's going to lead the ranging there. He decides he can't, because he then gets the pink letter. So it's like he gets a letter from Cotter Pike, and then he gets a letter from Ramsay Bolton, or maybe from Ramsay Bolton, whatever, the pink letter. And this is some tragic irony, because not only does it lead to his assassination, but it's a loss of focus. It harkens back to the final lesson he learned in book 1. No, the real war is to the north, and he shuns that for the war to the south. Even though maybe going to Hardhome isn't that good of an idea, maybe potentially it's not a better idea to necessarily go fight Ramsay Bolton. The true war is there. So he's prioritizing the southern problem over the northern one. It's debatable. I mean, arguably settling the south is necessary in order to properly fight the other. So that's the thing. Whatever you think, but
I wish that thought was more clear in Jon's mind.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I wish we got that idea from him more so, because that's the way I justify what he's doing. Because otherwise it seems like you said, it's such a distraction. It might even be like a little bit of power corrupting him.
Yeah.
He's kind of in charge now. He's standing up to the king, and someone's in my hometown. Let me go show them what's up. Never mind what's been driving me all along. So.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter necessarily what you and I think. The officers of the Watch made their points clear by driving them into Jon's body. But before the stabbing, most of the officers argued that, yeah, Jon shouldn't care. It's not their concern, blah, blah, blah. So Jon's problem is that it's maybe a literal, as Nina says, the sunk cost fallacy. Sending ships there, which is what he does. The first thing he does is send ships up there before he leads ranging. And then Cotter Pike says, hey, it's going really badly. That's the dead things in the water letter, right? So he's like, and Cotter says, the seas are racked by storms. You have to send help overland. And that's when he decides to go, and then changes his mind because of the pink letter. All of this is in one chapter, mind you. Not the first letter that he sends to Cotter. He gets a letter from Cotter when Cotter says, we're leaving. We're going there now. And then there's a follow-up, which is the dead things in the water letter. All that is Jon's last chapter in A Dance with Dragons, to be clear. The dead things in the water letter, the pink letter, and the stabbing. All happen in that last chapter. all the stuff about Hardhome. So that's why I brought up at the beginning. It's easy to let Hardhome get a little lost in the shuffle. I mean, that one chapter alone has so much going on, let alone all the other times Hardhome comes up and before that, or all the other plot lines going on. So, yeah, this is similar to. It's also, Nina points out, the other fallacy, the other bad idea aspect of this is, look at what happened with the Great Ranging. They go to the Fist of the First Men. They do all this stuff. It was a huge failure. It was not a good idea. It didn't go well. So why would this go well? This seems worse. This seems like a worse idea. Fewer people marching towards a definitive enemy. Whereas before they were like, we're going to see what's out there. Now, you know the enemy is there now. You know that the free folk are there starving. You know you don't have enough food for them. So, what do you do? How's he going to handle this? So there are a lot of problems here. Like, we respect Jon for his heroism and for wanting to do the right thing, but sometimes you just can't. And that's where you kind of see the argument from his officers. I don't agree with him stabbing him, but we don't have enough food for them that's a legitimate problem.
Even that is cold, no pun intended, as this might be. But even if they go get those free folk from Hardhome and bring them to the wall and then they starve to death, that's still better than letting them die and become part of the army of undead in Hardhome.
Yeah,
right?
It's ruthless, but it's true. Yeah.
And a large percent may end up starving if they bring them back, but at least there's some chance that they could try to keep them alive. Never mind they're being added to the enemy army, but there's no hope. There's nothing they can possibly do if they just leave them alone at Hardhome. So there's some chance that some way they'll find a way to feed them if they can get them back to the wall.
So let's talk about the letter from Cotter Pike, the second one, the one that really matters. As big as they are, Rob's will, and the pink letter might actually be all less important than this one. I personally find this one more interesting. It's more mysterious, more captivating. And I know you've heard it before, but this one never gets old. It's always one of the best. Quote.
At Hardhome, with 6 ships, wild seas, Blackbird lost with all hands, 2 Lyseni ships driven aground on Skane, Talon taking water. Very bad here. Wildlings eating their own dead things in the woods. Bravosi captains will only take women, children on their ships. Witch women call us slavers. Attempt to take Stormcrow defeated. 6 crew dead, many wildlings, 8 ravens left, dead things in the water. Send help by land, seas racked by storms. From Talon, by hand of Maester Harmoon.
Wow. That always gets me.
It's kind of dark and heavy, so it's hard for me to make a joke here, but it reminds me of Kevin in The Office when he wanted to use less words.
And it's just like, send help by land, dead things in what? Exactly. So
why use more word, less work? Fine.
Blackbird lost with all hands. Pour one out for old Tattersalt and the crew. He was second in command to Cotter on this mission. It's an actual Night's Watch vessel, unlike some of the others which were commandeered. It was the largest of the Night's Watch ships, and it's the ship that took Sam and Gilly and Maester Aemon to Bravos. So, too bad. The way Cotter's note just casually and separately mentions dead things in the woods and dead things in the water. It's not like back to back. He's like, dead things in the water, blah, 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 dead things in the woods. Like, wait, what was that? Dead. What are you talking? Yikes. And that's how it's becoming. It's becoming normal to mention dead creatures, like Walking Dead. It isn't something you need to explain anymore. It's like, oh yeah, that's a thing. Before it was like, what? Dead things walking? That's crazy. No, it's not. It's become normal. I mean, it is still kind of crazy, but you shouldn't be doubting it anymore.
Yeah, in the north at least, it's normal. I wonder how Stannis receives this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Does he consider it normal yet? Has he bought in?
Good question. Yeah. So it's a glimpse of what to come too, when this knowledge gets even farther, when everyone is just speaking about the undead as a matter of fact, because that's just a part of this world. They haven't quite become normal yet in terms of people speaking about them that way, but it's getting there. So there's 2 Lyseni ships aground on Skane. Those were 2 of the ones. Those are 2 of the ones commandeered, and rather those were 2 left over from Salladhor Saan. Salladhor had to leave them behind because they were not seaworthy. And the Night's Watch just kind of kept them and fixed them back up a bit. But they weren't in good shape when they left. They were barely seaworthy at the time. So will anyone from Skagos learn that those ships landed on Skane? Is this a Rickon tie-in somehow? Or just are they in big trouble? Are they going to get cannibalized? Are the dead things in the water sailors from the ships that sank? Is old Tattersalt a wight now? An underwater wight? Yikes. So if we think back on Cotter's first letter, the first one was that he said, okay, I'm leaving. I'm going my 11 ship fleet is sailing, and he has 20 ravens with him. 20 good ravens. And at the point of this letter, he says 8 ravens left and 6 ships. So 5 ships have been lost and 12 ravens, I guess. And although some of them were probably just, sent back. Still, that's like by the time that letter, it's entirely possible by the time that John is reading that letter, all the ships are sunk by then. Maybe that's going a little too far. Maybe a couple survived. Maybe 1 or 3 made it back to Eastwatch. Which ships? Who knows? The Bravosi ships might be like, we're out of here. We're not going to Eastwatch. We're going to Bravos. We're getting out of here. They commandeered us, but if we go back to Bravo, what are they going to do? Come after us? The Night's Watch when they're in the middle of this? I don't think so. So it'd be a way to escape. The quote in there says, which women call us slavers? That doesn't seem to be true. I don't think the Night's Watch is engaging in slavery, but they had just experienced that. The 2 other Lyseni ships, the Good Heart and the Elephant that we spoke on, they absolutely were engaged in slavery. So they see more ships with probably similar design, similar looking people. They're probably going to think that's more slavers.
And that was a consideration John had too when he's trying to figure out how to deal with this. He wanted to send some women with the contingency to Hardhome so they'd be less likely to be seen as slavers, right?
Mm-hmm. You're right. That's very thoughtful of John, although again, it's maybe sunk fallacy.
Yeah,
that's too much of a pun there. Sunk cost fallacy, literally sunk ships fallacy.
I also wonder, by the way, if those ships, those Bravosi ships, if they did go back to Bravos, what the reaction would be, because it would be so fantastic. It might take a minute for people to even believe it, much less think it's a personal concern. But how close is Bravo? So would they be worried? Because I don't know if anyone just says, oh, well, the undead can't get across the water, so we're not worried. They might be a little worried if they can get across the water.
Yeah,
right?
that would be the first question they ask. Can those guys sail? Do they have volcanic rafts like after Krakatoa? Yeah, so it's pretty darn far. It's a lot of ocean, but yeah, you might be... You'd be very thankful for that ocean, probably, in between it, though, if you're hearing about things like that. And also, in terms of the slavery, Arya, she hears that amongst sailors chatting about it, that there's probably going to be more Lyseni ships coming to try to get more slaves. And partly because the price of slavers has gone up, thanks to Daenerys wreaking havoc on the slave trade and freeing so many slaves, and that's partly why people are going farther away to try to find new ones. So, and of course, if any free folk are brought to Bravos, they're obviously not going to be enslaved by the Bravosi, and they might actually end up in a decent spot. Those who aren't, though, I don't know. Maybe some of them get back to Eastwatch. Maybe some of them do end up on the right side of the wall and are actually able to help in the coming fight. Some of them would take up arms and be ready to go when the time comes. But free folk at Eastwatch could cause the same problems that free folk at Castle Black is causing. I mean, they're just not getting along for kind of obvious reasons. And you don't have a guy like John there to necessarily be the go-between. Well, even Castle Black doesn't have that now to kind of make that work, if it's even possible to make it work. So, yeah, they're going to have a lot of chaos at Eastwatch, too, given maybe half of their men were just drowned, and those who survived might be bringing back hungry mouths to feed, or they might be bitter towards those people. I don't know. Yeah, it's bad. The wall is in horrible, horrible shape, and it's not just because the others are coming. Although that's a lot of the reason why the horrible things are happening in advance, but still, a lot of it's starvation and winter that it's not, would have maybe been happening anyway. Let's talk about Melisandre's dream, because again, we don't have a first-hand POV there. We haven't seen it straightforwardly. We have to look at it from these indirect angles. Again, though her visions or interpretations are not always accurate, in fact, they're often not accurate, sometimes they are. And this appears to be one of those cases. The details line up so well, and don't really fit anything else, that it seems like it works. It seems like we've got a winner here in terms of matching the dream to the reality, which sometimes we can't do. She doesn't know what she's seeing. So this is our interpretation. It's not Melisandre saying, oh, I see this. Oh, I know what this is. No, she has no idea what she's seeing, but we do because of the descriptions. In her solitary but very illuminating chapter, Melisandre asks the Lord of Light for a vision of Stannis, for your king, your instrument. She sees a lot of things. None of it really seems to be related to Stannis. But this part seems to be very related to our subject today. Quote,
snowflakes swirled from a dark sky, and ashes rose to meet them, the gray and the white whirling around each other as flaming arrows arced above a wooden wall, and dead things shambled silent through the cold, beneath a great gray cliff where fires burned inside 100 caves. Then the wind rose, and the white mist came sweeping in, impossibly cold, and one by one the fires went out. Afterward, only the skulls remained. Death, thought Melisandre. The skulls are death.
Well, yeah, of course they are. I mean, all the people vanished and replaced by skulls. Yeah, that's a pretty easy interpretation. We're with you there, Melisandre. But she didn't know what else was going on. However, that is very clearly Hardhome. Great gray cliff where fires burn inside 100 caves. Yes. Flaming arrows arced above a wooden wall. We see that in the show version, which pretty likely they got that from this. They read this section and were like, how can we make that look that way? And despite your theory about maybe seeing this in the past, it's possible. It doesn't really work, though, because the others weren't active then. And that's even the free folk would say that. So it doesn't. That's why we're pretty amongst Melisandre visions. This is one of the ones we're the most confident about because it just doesn't really fit anywhere else. Anything else we've seen, it fits Hardhome extremely well and nothing else particularly well at all. Remember when we covered the TV show and there was Dany's dream in season 2? It was like their version of the House of the Undying, and there was that endless debate over, is that ash or snow in the throne room? Well, here we have them both. I love that. The gray and the white whirling together, dark sky, snowflakes swirled from a dark sky, and ashes rose. Yeah, maybe it was both then too. I think we did suggest that possibility that it may have been both. Anyway, I was chuckling at that. Like, this is this is exactly that moment. Of course, this was written before that TV episode, so
especially the context of ice and fire, like both seems, easily correct.
So the impossibly cold rising white mist. Also, it's pretty hard to see that as anything but the others, and in fact, that's exactly the language Tormund uses to describe them. He says, "White mists rising up, and the air is so cold it hurts to breathe." Impossibly cold. That sounds really bad. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe, but there's never been a more distinct and powerful description of just how cold the others are than this one. Because what's being implied here is that the volcano is being extinguished at least above a certain level. Not like all the way down beneath the earth, but maybe. I mean, probably not that. But the fires that are in the caves, the screaming caves, were probably shut off by the presence of the others. They probably stopped screaming. It's like it went silent because of them, which is almost more scary than the screaming of the caves is when the screaming caves went silent because they're intimidated by the others. And their cold is so cold, so impossibly cold, as it says, that the volcano stops. It's temporarily just too cold for the magma. Everything just cools off. It's like, oh my God, that is way colder than I imagine. I mean, no wonder Waymar Royce's sword shattered. No wonder Tormund's child just died in the night. No wonder other people just die in the night because it's that cold. Wow. I mean, nothing has approached that level of explaining just how cold it gets. I mean, whoa. So here's something else in addition to that. So this is the kind of, if we're looking at our existing grand magic overlap theory, it's almost like this is the kind of thing that the sorcerers of Valyria would have done to keep the volcanoes from going off. Maybe not to this degree, and maybe they had more control over fire than using ice to block it. But it's similar, like in concept, like they're tamping the fire somehow. It's like if you were like a a sorcerer prince of Valyria. This is the kind of magical philosophy you'd be studying, like the elementals, how they work together, and is it better to control fire to reduce fire, or is it better to control ice to battle against fire? Like, which of these things works better if you're a spellcaster? Those are the kind of things you might be delving into. But for us, we're just like, I have no idea how these things work. It's just wow, this is powerful. It's like it's this one rock meets hard place. It's not yes, there's the idea of being caught between the two, but this is what happens when they actually collide. And it looks like hard place is beaten rock. The cold is overwhelming the fire.
It's another, I don't know, potential motivation. The idea that the children of the forest created the others. What if they created them to stop volcanic forces? What if they created them for cold powers to counter hot powers?
Yeah, that works. I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things about that fit. And it's reflective of the others too in their nature, which is that they are a force of nature, but turned up to 11, like the wall itself or something like that. Yes, they are bringing the cold. The cold is a part of nature, but it's supernaturally enhanced. So Hardhome has had the full ice and fire treatment. 600 years ago, it exploded, and now it's consumed by ice, or about to be, including the very fires of the earth. Let's talk a little about Mother Mole. More on Mother Mole, or more on Mother Mole. Which is it? Is she a foolish fanatic who led her people to ruin, or simply the vassal of tragic prophecy? After all, her vision was right to a certain degree. Ships did arrive. Technically, some people were taken south. And if any Night's Watch ships escape, more of them could escape. But here's where we consider this from another angle. Rather than considering her and whether she's being honest or which we think she probably is, but let's consider it from a different angle. In a world where dreams can be visited, encouraged, or even planted, Three-Eyed Crow showing up in Bran's dreams, Quaithe apparently showing up in Dany's, probably by glass candle, whatever the means, it seems to be a thing in this world. Maybe Mother Mole was given that dream by some source. If Bloodraven can go into Bran's dreams, why can't the others go into people's dreams? Well, maybe because they can't, but it's not some crazy idea that just comes out of nowhere. It's high magic-y, but it's supported. The idea is
there's precedent set for this.
Yeah. So why
you can
not?
Easily come up with a million reasons why it couldn't be, but but you might need to, because there's precedent for it.
So you see how the others would benefit from this. They trick all these refugees that are scattered all in a lot of different places into kind of all coalescing in one spot where they can overwhelm them and add them to their army. They benefit from this dream far more than anyone else. It's not necessary, though. It's not necessary to explain this. People doing desperate things in desperate times in a supernatural setting is not necessary to explain this. But it fits, and George does like to hit us with the boths. He likes why not both type explanations. Why not have some supernatural influence? Why not have a little cruel undercurrent of fake dreaming to make this happen? But again, not necessary. Everything works without this theory. It all could have just happened the way it does. But I like the idea as potentially entertaining, a potentially way to explain give the others even more like evil intelligence.
Another angle, by the way, is if Jon or whoever can't rescue these people, then it would benefit the others more than anyone. But if they can, then that might be a motivation of Bloodraven, right? If he can plant this dream to get all these free folk in one place where there's a port that the Night's Watch or whoever can come rescue them, then that will stop the others from accumulating all these bodies around the north that are going to die of starvation and cold and everything, so
they would have collected all those refugees eventually anyway if they were split apart. This way, at least 20% of them get away. The other method, none of them get away, or almost none.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Another rock in a hard place. Well, it's better to save 20% than 0%.
And it might also be a more consolidated force that's easier for the Night's Watch or whoever to be aware of and deal with, and et cetera, rather than just kind of scattered everywhere. At least there's some consolidation for them to know which direction they're coming from, or where we need defenses to be, or how many there are, et cetera, et cetera.
And how similar was Mother Mole's dream to Melisandre's? Melisandre is out here asking for visions. So if we're talking about giving me a vision, like she's literally, that's how she interprets it. She's like, I want visions. Lord of Light, give me visions. And they come. Now, whether they're actually coming from the Lord of Light is something we can't answer, but it's just another possible explanation for where magical dreams can come from in this world. They can be given by higher powers or whatever. There is some overlap in the two dreams, but there's definitely a lot of differences. Melisandre doesn't dream of them getting away. Mother Mole's dream is more positive. At least she interprets it that way. Now that's possibly the difference. Is Mother Mole's desperate and is hoping, so she sees it positively. Where Melisandre already before this dream has expressed that the free folk are a doomed people. So maybe she's kind of seeing what she expects to see. She sees all the people, all the death, all the skulls means death. Okay, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. But that doesn't mean they're all going to die. That doesn't mean that, there's no survivor. It doesn't, it's not the whole species there. Not every wildling is in that spot. So but she's not wrong all the time. And again, the dream seems very specific. So I'm not sure her interpretation is biased so much as it is straightforward, but it might be, One other prophetic individual who deserves an episode of their own one day has sort of weighed in on Hardhome as well. I almost missed this. Caught it late last night. I was just reviewing some of the, kind of going back through the books, looking for talk about Hardhome, reading a little further. And I was like, whoa, I can't believe I almost missed this one. You will recognize who this is by their manner of speaking. And it comes as they're speaking of who will lead the expedition to Hardhome.
I will lead it. His bells rang merrily. We will march into the sea and out again. Under the waves we will ride seahorses, and mermaids will blow seashells to announce our coming. Oh, oh, oh.
Everyone laughs. Even Selyse laughs. Like Selyse, who was humorless, she laughs, but Jon does not laugh. I'm with Jon. Nothing Patchface says is funny. Everything he says is creepy.
Speaks to her bad sense of humor.
Yeah, exactly. Only like horrifying things make her laugh. Yeah. Into the sea and out again sounds too much like dead things in the water, which Patchface is. He is a dead thing from the water, apparently. Like, he died and came back. That is the story we hear about him. The person was like, no, he felt dead. That was a dead person that stood back up and started talking in prophecy. And look at the wording. Mermaids will blow seashells to announce our coming. Oh. 3 seashell blasts? Excuse me? Wow. Yeah. Watch out for Patchface. See? Why are people laughing at that? That is scary. Y'all are foolish to laugh at that. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is crazy. Oh. Like I said, Patchface will get an episode one day. We'll have to do that. But we've also, many people in the fandom, including us, have explored the notion that under the sea means in winter or during, the long night or something like that. It's not clear, but a lot of his prophecies kind of, if you look at it in that light, they fit better or could explain some things. But anyway, we'll save more of that for a Patchface episode. Also, I'm just kind of, I'm one of those people that's kind of scared of clowns. So Patchface, just picturing him is a little bit scary, like let alone the things that are actually coming out of his mouth. Like if you go by Melisandre's visions, blood is coming out of his mouth, and one of them with skulls all around, which she sees as death, right? Same.
What's so scary about that, Aziz? Is that why we haven't done an episode on him yet? You're too scared?
Yes, that's exactly why. I've been outed. You figured it out. So, Hardhome's outlook. Well, here's where we make some predictions, maybe offer some guesses as to what all this means or where it might be going. On the south side of the wall, will Tormund still lead a ranging there? Kind of doubt it. I mean, Jon was just stabbed. I mean, he was like, you get your group together, but then like, 1-1 gets stabbed, Jon gets stabbed, all this stuff is happening. It might be too late to go. I don't even know. I'm guessing that it's not even going to happen.
I think there's a chance of Jon being stabbed reinforces it.
Oh.
Tormund might not feel welcome there anymore. He might like, I need to get out of here. My ally is gone.
So I need to go get some of these guys because they will be my friends or whatever. Yeah. They'll at least be on my side. Yeah. And the others might just have already gotten there and taken it all. They may have already those refugees might already be wights. Those ships might already be sunk. And if that's the case, the others did have an army already. It might not have been very big. We saw it at the Fist of the First Men. I don't know how many men that was, but it was certainly enough to overwhelm the 300 members of the Night's Watch, which isn't necessarily saying a lot because they picked that spot, the Fist of the First Men, because of how defensible it was against humans. They weren't really expecting to face the undead, and it's a whole different game when you're fighting the undead. They also weren't that prepared to fight the undead. They didn't have, like, a lot of dragon glass weapons. They weren't using enough fire arrows. They started doing that, but they were prepared to fight people. They weren't prepared to fight the undead. So either way, it was enough undead to overwhelm that group. We're told there's at least 6,000 refugees at Hardhome, or were. So that's most likely far more than the others had to this point. So if this happens the way we think, this is their army. Before they had, like a squad. Maybe they had a legion, one legion. Now they have a whole shebang. Whatever word you want to use that describes a large amount of people, or Walking Dead. Same difference, I guess. So this is at least a tripling or quadrupling. I'm guessing more than that, though. And which brings us back to the idea of slavers will hear about this location and will show back up to get more slaves. What will they actually find when they show up? We're like, oh, we shouldn't have come here. Oh my God. What is that? Are those undead? Like, let's turn around. Do not drop anchor. Sail back from whence we came. But maybe they won't. They probably won't just see that on the shore. They'll probably show up and be like, what the heck happened here? And then awful things might happen. And, of course, as we mentioned earlier as well, I want to repeat the possible notion that Hardhome could be the trigger for Dany. The thing that she learns about the big event, the big swallowing up of many souls that tells Dany that's where she needs to be. Something's got to bring her north. It won't just be like, hey, we need you. She's got to hear about, like, it needs to be suffering. It needs to be something big. It needs to be something that draws her someone of her personality, a rescuer, as Tyrion puts it accurately. She is a rescuer. She rescued Slaver's Bay, or is trying to. She will rescue the people of the North if she hears about it in time to do anything about it.
I wonder if she might not be the only one. She might be the most key and powerful figure, but I wonder if it might, I don't know, young Griff or some other Tyrell leader or some, I wonder if it'll be enough to get the attention of the realm in general.
The great difficulty with predicting any of that stuff is the order of things happen. Like, what about when is Stannis is he gonna burn his daughter? Is the night fort? Like, what's gonna happen as a result of? Why is he gonna do that in the first place? Like, what drives him to do that? It won't just be bad weather like it was on the show.
And what will the effects of it be?
Yeah, exactly. What will the effects of it be? Yeah, like there's a lot we just can't predict. And when will Dany hear about this? Is it during? Is it later? Is it much later? Yeah, it's just way too hard to. Too many moving. Just figuring out what's going to happen at the wall with all those moving parts is hard enough. Trying to bring in Dany and Arya and just forget about it. Just literally, absolutely forget about it. Just wait and see. No, we won't forget about it. We will continue to talk about it. But I'm saying that to acknowledge the difficulty of trying to theorize about those northern plots.
With confidence, anyway. You can theorize a lot, but there's so many moving pieces, it's hard to be super confident.
Yes. The final quote for this episode comes from the same place we got our first talk of the episode. We spent the beginning with a little bit of Varamir's POV. Here he speaks of what was happening to the refugees from the battle at the wall, Stannis versus Mance, in the aftermath of that slaughter.
They had escaped the black-cloaked crows and the knights in their gray steel, but more relentless enemies stalked them now. Every day left more corpses by the trails. Some died of hunger, some of cold, some of sickness. Others were slain by those who had been their brothers in arms when they marched south with Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall.
That's a way that keeps happening. It's a way that George has his characters speak of the undead. It's indirect. Others were slain by those who had been their brothers in arms. They don't call it. Rarely is the term wight used or the undead or anything like that. It's always like this indirect dead things in the woods, dead things in the waters. Like the way even Tormund, even the free folk kind of refer to them like indirectly like that. They don't want to. It's almost like using their name summons them. Like makes them more likely to hear you. Like certain people, you don't want to say what is it in Harry Potter? You don't say Voldemort. Yeah, maybe that's some kind of thing. They don't want to say the others. You know, they don't want that word being used.
It's also, I don't know if George intended this, but it can be vague in another way. Like some people might have been killed just by formal rivals that came together under Mance, but now they're back to being rivals. Or they're starving to death and they killed each other for their food or their equipment or whatever else.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily be undead. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But in the context of everything, it seems to be. That does seem to be.
Like you mean like people who are so like out of their mind that they're mindless may as well be dead, but dead on their feet kind of thing, that kind of thing. Here's another thing that makes the whole thing a little more terrifying. Remember that when a lot of free folk crossed the wall, a lot of them accepted the offer and passed through the gates. The giants were willing to do it, but then they didn't because the mammoths couldn't fit. So they decided to walk east. So they're heading towards Eastwatch. This puts them not in the... This doesn't have them heading towards Hardhome directly, but it puts them in the path of where the other's army would be going if it went south from Hardhome. It would be hitting Eastwatch. Now, they could bypass all this. They could make it to Eastwatch and be on the right side of the wall. But it's entirely possible that these giants and or mammoths get caught by this army of the others and end up in it, end up part of that army, and all of a sudden that army is even more terrifying. You got mammoths and giants in it. I mean, we kind of expect them to have mammoths and giants anyway and other animals, but this is like a whole squad of them rather than just the occasional odd addition of a large lumbering undead beast.
I'd rather have, I'm making numbers up, but I'd rather have 10 giants on my side fighting against 10 giants on the other side than 20 giants on the other side and no giants on my side.
Right? Undead giant. I mean, that's another one where you can use the imagery from the TV show to get an idea what an undead giant would look like, because we see that. And it's pretty damn scary. It's pretty like, how, as a human being, how do you face that? You're glad to have the wall there. To like, yeah, he's like bashing on the wall. Like, it's not going to break through the wall just by hitting it. But if it can get around, yeah, you don't want that to happen. And there's so many places for maybe the wall to be breached, or the Night's Watch can't cover it all. I mean, yeah, there's so many ways for them to get around. And Eastwatch is perhaps going to become a focal point. That it probably deserves an episode too. A lot is going to happen there. There's a lot of figures there. Gren and Pip were sent there by Jon, so whatever's going to happen there, they'll experience it, and hopefully they make it out. You know, as grim a picture as George R. Martin has painted for Hardhome, and we've all helped you picture and understand that grimness a little better, we hope, it might actually have a chance at a good ending, right? In the super duper long term, meaning the end of the series, meaning Dream of Spring predictions or hopes, maybe Hardhome will become settled again. If the others are defeated and there's a confidence that they're gone, if not forever, then, well, it might be back, but it'll be 8,000 years, so we got some time. And especially if the wall is down. And maybe winter, maybe it's warmer, because, I mean, winter is busted by this. Maybe the cycles of winter are changed to something more normal. Like, who knows what the world will look like at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire? Like, weather, like, climate may change dramatically, or at least significantly enough. And Hardhome was settled even without that. So if the outlook on its danger, on its climate all improves, well, that's all the more reason to maybe guess this will happen. So if it's entirely free from the threat of the others, you know, maybe it's get that place open for business again. Reopen Home Depot, right? There'll be a need of lots of construction projects and all that. So, let alone the wall itself, right? Remember, go ahead. Yeah.
I want to be positive. I want to think that those ships are going to rescue a bunch of people, that Tormund will get there and rescue more, that probably still a bunch will be killed by the others and taken into that army. But I still am trying to think of the most positive things that could happen. And it's still pretty negative. Even if all my optimistic outlooks come true, it's still going to be an awful tragedy. So,
yep. So, it's also got a lot of food, like the natural. It's a good area, right? The harbor, so there's positive. There's things that might, but maybe the others will just wipe all that out. But if with enough effort and love, maybe it could become Soft Home. Yes. Or, yeah, make your hard house a soft home. But maybe those screaming caves are just too much of a nope. Like, who wants to live there? Maybe it's just like, I don't want to live there. It's just the vibes. It's just the history of this place. It's like living in a haunted house. It's like, I don't believe. I'm not superstitious, but people were killed here. Like, it's just, I don't want to think about that. It's not that I worry about me, but like, I don't want that in my head, in the place where I'm living. I don't want that to just pop in my head every once in a while. But
maybe they'll shut it down. Maybe their impossibly cold presence will freeze back the water and the magma and end that shrieking cave sound.
Yeah, maybe the caves won't be screaming. Maybe they'll just be softly humming. Maybe they'll be singing nicely, singing sweetly. The sweetly singing cave. That's what it'll be called. All the positive things, all the positive changes are yet to come.
The sweetly singing caves of Soft Home.
That's the future we can dream of in a dream of spring. That's our new theory. It will be called Soft Home and named after its sweetly singing caves. Yes. Which many tourists come to visit and spend lots of money, and they exit through the gift shop buying little walrus tusks and chunks of werewood and dragon glass. And yes, this is a very fine future we've imagined. The trivia question was, what is Cotter Pike's ship? The answer is Talon. You would have gotten that from the letter where he says, from Talon. He also says Talon taking on water, which is why we may never hear from Talon again. I hope we do. I like Cotter Pike. Seems like a good leader, good man to have on your side. Brusque and rude, but again, guy you want on your side.
Man of few words.
Yeah, and he's not even the one writing those. But Harmoon's like, you really want me to write it that way? Just without the pronouns and out the adjective, just this, that.
No articles and
yeah, I'm not even using my grammar correctly, but neither would Cotter, so right, folks. We hope you enjoyed this excellent, fun time we had with Hardhome. I certainly did. It's a really fun topic, and I think you can see why it's so important. It's one of the most important locations that we may never see on screen, although maybe we'll see it at the end. Like, that would be fun if a POV goes there, like John goes there in a Dream of Spring. Like, hey, we actually see Hardhome. All right. Maybe we'll see it in more visions. Maybe Bran will see it. Maybe Melisandre will have more visions of it. There are ways we can see it without going there, So, and maybe we will actually go there.
George has said that he doesn't intend on bringing a new perspective, right?
Correct.
A new POV.
Correct.
Because I was hoping maybe we'll get Tormund's POV when he goes there or something like that.
The exception is the prologue and epilogues. He's still going to maybe give one-offs there. So maybe that'll be a way for some Hardhome action to jump in a way we wouldn't normally have seen it coming.
I'm rooting for the next prologue to be Tormund and Hardhome. That's
right on. Okay, folks, there's other episodes I mentioned throughout this one that will be a good one for you to carry on with, to re-listen to, or listen to the first time. The Sea Snake episode, you can hear about all his voyages, including to Hardhome. Dragonstone, we brought that up as a alternative and a thing that happened around the same time it was founded. We have many questions that would apply to both episodes. The Doom of Valyria, of course, is very relevant here. Our episode on blood magic, and our other episodes on Valyria as well during Valar Rereadus for the World of Ice and Fire, where we discussed a variety of topics surrounding Valyria's origin and fall and in between. And that included a lot of crossover with this topic, including the volcano stuff. Sean, why don't you hit us with some patron names? You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I love this way that we get to interact with our patrons. I haven't themed names in this world. We've got Our Hand of the King is a base-born manjack, literally a drunken spearman. Gods help us. And I'm assuming that's the base-born manjack that's in our patron calls each time. And I think he came in second place in both.
Yeah, Ashton got first in both, and he got second. Yeah.
There's Lady Buffington, Alchemist of the North. Lady Raydetto of House Avocado.
That's Lord Raydetto.
Oh, did I say lady? I'm sorry. Lord Raydetto of House Avocado, protector of the royal kitchens. The words are green in the morning, dark by evening. Very avocado themed there. Jake Snow, aka Jacob Ice Eyes, the bastard of the last river. And a very simple but known name here, Game of Owns.
Hey, Game of
one
Owns
of our
podcast.
patrons.
They just
Check
did.
them out.
We are patrons of each other, and they just did their trailer discussion for House of the Dragon, and they're working on Hedge Knight right now. Or sorry, Sworn Sword.
And we have another one here, Mallory Sand, Witch of the Storm, Wolf Rider of Zulfric, the Black Beast. That's Sanrixian.
yeah,
Aziz and I just appeared on her podcast recently.
Yeah, which is over on Twitch. They stream on Twitch, so check that out. You can find them over there, Sanrixian on Twitch, and you go over there and follow History of Westeros and Sanrixian on Twitch while you're at it. Thanks as well to Nina, and you can go check her out on goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. Thanks to Joey, Jesse, and Bran for our awesome intros and music and all that good stuff that makes our show look so professional. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for the maps that you see both in some of our video intros and this sitting right behind me, Michael's world map, which you can buy at claradox.de. That's KLARADOX.de. You buy the file, print it out at your own leisure at a local print shop, and that's a good way to do it. Also, thanks to the Bengineer and of course, to my compatriots Ashea and Sean, who need no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. We'll see you all next time for more, and you know what to do in the meantime. Valar, read us.